and facing criminal charges for it. She's warning Donald Trump is following the same model here with attacks on press freedoms in America. And later in the show, Columbia School of Journalism Jelani Cobb joins us in studio.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Then we'll open the phone and text lines for an economic check-in. Do you have COVID recession deja vu? Also, when signs point to an economic crisis, but the parallels stop there. Last time around, the federal government stepped in with at least some financial relief. This time, the kids might be on their own with only 2 dolls, and teeny tiny dolls at that, under the Christmas tree. How are you weathering the Trump-induced economic storm? It's all ahead. Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The U.S. and Ukraine have signed an agreement that gives the U.S. access to Ukraine's vast mineral deposits. It creates a joint investment fund, and revenue from the fund will come from new licenses for critical raw materials and rare earth minerals. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the U.S. will share revenue from that fund with Ukraine.
This is a total economic partnership. This isn't just rare earths. It's infrastructure, it's energy. So there's the opportunity here for both sides to really win.
He spoke with Fox Business. However, the deal does not provide Ukraine with explicit security guarantees from the U.S. The fund can be used to finance new military aid to Ukraine. Harvard University has met a deadline from the Department of Homeland Security. It has handed over information about international students. From member station GBH in Boston, Kirk Carapezza reports the university isn't saying exactly what was shared.
2 weeks ago, the Trump administration demanded detailed records for foreign students' illegal and violent activities. If not, the school would risk losing the ability to enroll international students altogether. In a message to the campus community, Harvard Executive VP Meredith Wienick says the university has responded to that request, but doesn't detail what was turned over. Wienick reiterates Harvard's, quote, steadfast commitment to international students, urging them to stay focused on academics. The Trump administration accuses Harvard of anti-Semitism, setting pro-Palestinian demonstrations. For NPR News, I'm Kirk Carapezza in Boston.
Fewer people identify as Southern Baptists, and fewer churches belong to that denomination. That's according to recent data released by Lifeway Research. Nevertheless, the church says it is encouraged by some of the positive numbers. From member station WPLN in Nashville, Mariana Bacallao has more.
The Southern Baptist Church baptized more people last year than it has in the past 7. Plus, its congregation saw growth in weekly church attendance and participation in small group Bible studies. But congregants are still leaving the nation's largest Protestant mainline denomination as leadership debates the role of women in ministry. New Spring Megachurch in South Carolina left the denomination last month after a Southern Baptist committee questioned the leadership role of one of the church's female staffers. The Southern Baptist Church will soon converge for its annual meeting, where church leadership could take up the issue, along with budget discussions. The denomination saw a nearly $470 million loss last year in church giving. For NPR News, I'm Mariana Bacallao in Nashville.
On Wall Street, stocks are higher. The Dow is up more than 300 points. The Nasdaq is up more than 2%. This is NPR.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. More than 80 faculty members at Harvard University have pledged to donate 10% of their salaries for up to 1 year to support the school's legal and funding challenges against the Trump administration. According to one Harvard professor, the commitments amount to more than $2 million. Businesses on Cape Cod are breathing a sigh of relief now that the Trump administration has resumed processing H-2B visas. Many Cape Cod employers rely on H-2B recipients for seasonal work as chefs, dishwashers, and housekeepers when the region sees a big influx of summer tourists. Provincetown Independent reports that many of the people who do those jobs are Jamaicans who go to the Outer Cape through a seasonal worker program that dates back to 1952. Mac Hay, who owns 5 Mac's restaurants and 4 fish markets on the Outer and Lower Cape, says the money the visa holders earn in America has helped his employees build homes and start their own businesses in Jamaica. In sports, Red Sox Blue Jays wrap up their series tonight. Celtics have their second-round NBA playoff schedule. The series will start in Boston Monday, May 5th. Game 2 will be Wednesday, May 7th. Game 3 on Saturday, May 10th. Tickets are available, and we still don't know yet who they will be playing. In the forecast, partly cloudy, low 70s today. Chance of showers overnight tonight, low around 50 degrees. And sun, clouds, and mid-70s tomorrow. And starting Saturday, we are looking at about a week of rain. Boo. It is right now 67 degrees in Boston. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Eric and Wendy Schmidt through the Schmidt Family Foundation, working toward a healthy, resilient, secure world for all. On the web at theschmidt.org. This is NPR.
Eastern Browdy, I am Marjorie Egan. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We have a really great show today with voices from the GBH Media Summit, which is going on right now. Columbia University's Jelani Cobb is going to join us later in the show, as well as Amy Spitalnick. She's talking about anti-Semitism. We're also live at the Boston Public Library tomorrow with music from Skylark Vocal Ensemble for our Live Music Friday segment. Hello, Jim.
Hi, and we're not only back at the library tomorrow, but May 9th, the governor joins us for an hour at the library. May 13th, the Attorney General joins us for an hour at the library. We're joined now, though, in Studio 3 by free speech champion, journalist, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Ressa. In 2012, she co-founded the Filipino news service known as Rappler, which would go on to play a key role documenting human rights abuses from the country's authoritarian president, Rodrigo Duterte. Brought her an unimaginable amount of scrutiny, including many, many criminal charges aimed at silencing her by the regime. But she wasn't and hasn't been silenced. Here's just a little sound from her Nobel Prize-winning acceptance speech.
We're at a sliding door moment where we can continue down the path we're on and descend further into fascism. Or we can choose to fight for a better world. To do that, please ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth?
Maria Ressa is the CEO and co-founder of Rappler, is also professor of professional practice at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia, and has been a distinguished fellow at Columbia's Institute of Global Politics, and she's author of How to Stand Up to a Dictator, which it appears many institutional leaders in this country have failed to read. Maria, it is an honor to have you here. Thanks so much for your time.
So glad to be here with you both.
Great.
Well, Maria, we'll get back in a couple of minutes to all of what we have not been willing to sacrifice here in the United States for the truth. But just for people that don't know the whole backstory, talk about what life was like when you got into hot water with Duterte in the Philippines.
Oh my gosh. So first of all, I feel like what I'm living through today in America is like deja vu, and I have PTSD. So it's like, what did we live through? Exponential attacks on social media, weaponized social media. Free speech used to stifle free speech. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour, and it would astroturf and seed the meta-narrative that was used a year later to begin legal. So the weaponization of the law. So 2016, attacks on social media. 2017, 21 investigations by my government into our Rappler is about 120 people. And then after 2017, 2018 was the beginning of the RSEC tried to shut us down in January of 2018. I stupidly called a press conference and forgot to tell our lawyers, which was the best thing possible. No, but that's 2018. 2019 was my year of arrests. More than 10 arrest warrants in a little over a year. 2020, I was convicted of cyber libel. 2020 won the Nobel Prize. And that reminded me that doing the right thing is the right thing. And 2022 was when we filed. So I have now, it's almost a decade later, but I have Out of the 10 criminal charges, we have won 8 of them. The last 2, one is already at the Philippine Supreme Court, which means in order to be here in America, I have to ask my Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel. All told, those 10 charges carried cumulative sentence of exactly 103 years in jail. So there were moments in time when I was like, I got to be okay with going to jail, right? But beyond that, it's the violence. And that comes from the tech. Because online violence is real-world violence. And women and the fracture lines of society is exactly what that pounds. And that's part of the reason the world is where we are today. Last, right? So I can sound really bleak, but know that after almost a decade, when we had no idea what was going to happen next, when we were ready with emergency plans for everything, in March this year, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issued an arrest warrant for Rodrigo Duterte, the president who was trying to jail me. He was arrested in March for crimes against humanity. He's now in jail at The Hague, and he is starting trial in September. And here I am in your studio.
Before we leave the Philippines and the Duterte regime, in 2017, you met with one of the people you now call the Broligarchs. You met with Zuckerberg because of the impact that Facebook was having on the disinformation campaign. Could you describe that to us?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I compared the 2 dictators I was living with, Rodrigo Duterte, who crumbled our institutions of democracy within 6 months. Right? The Philippines has a constitution patterned after the United States. I joke that we spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. This is our colonial past, 300 years under Spanish colonial rule, and then under American colonial rule for 50 years. So our constitution has an executive, a legislature, and a judiciary. And what we saw happen was, I called it the 3 C's: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. A very strong executive co-opted the legislature. And then, the judiciary then was last man standing, but not so well at that point, because if you think about it, the only way institutions stand is by the men and women who have the power to have the courage to stand, right? Anyway, so we'll go back. What you were asking about Zuckerberg. Yeah. Oh, so Zuckerberg was the other one. The Philippines for 6 years in a row spent the most time online and on social media globally until 2021. And Facebook, at the time when I met Zuckerberg, this was in San Jose at the F8 on the sideline. The Philippines at that point was 97% of Filipinos online were on Facebook. Facebook was our social media. Today, like a few years after that, it became 100%. So Facebook is critically important. I invited him to come to the Philippines, and I told him, 93% of us are on Facebook. Facebook can do tremendous good. He frowned a little bit, and I was thinking, did I say the wrong thing? And then he asked me, Maria, where are the other 3%?
Yeah,
so
I believe that one.
So who's the bigger dictator who was never elected? Mark Zuckerberg.
And what was the message you were trying to convey to Mark Zuckerberg about the role of Facebook?
That it could do tremendous good. But, you ran the clip from the Nobel lecture in 2021, and we did not do anything. Right? If anything, those 3 Ds, you saw that. I think this was the New York Times that first said it: deny, deflect, distract. That's exactly what big tech has done. And we have, actually, I would say both in the physical and the virtual world, the biggest problem we face globally is whether or not rule of law still exists. Because Putin attacking Ukraine, right? These are the norms. The international rule of law is broken, and we haven't yet gotten to the point where we hold people accountable. But here in tech, even worse in terms of impunity. Data privacy is largely a myth today. Right? You have been cloned if you are on any of these social media platforms. What they'll say is machine learning builds a model of you that knows you better than you know yourself. As of last year, in May last year, Consumer Reports said Facebook alone has more than 2,300 different big data sets of every person on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And we haven't even touched X and X after Twitter and the other parts, TikTok. But anyway, so that's the point. Data privacy. Data is everything. And the human rights we deserve in the physical world, we deserve in the virtual world.
So get back to your first comment, Maria Ressa. Is Trump Duterte writ large?
Duterte was Trump before Trump was Trump. Sorry. I mean, from my part of the world, right? And what you're seeing, I said this at the beginning, it's a little bit like deja vu and PTSD combined, because these are the ways democracy slides, right? It's first technology as an enabler and as an accelerant. I've said this over and over, the three things, because the design of social media prioritizes the spread of lies over facts. And if you use fear, anger, and hate in 2017 numbers in the Philippines, it spread 10 times faster, right? So without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. The only government that exists without trust is a dictatorship, right? But beyond that, we don't have a shared reality. Democracy happens in a shared reality. We have to listen as much as scream. And now we're challenging whether climate change exists officially, but also beyond that, you can't have journalism. You can't think slow. You cannot have democracy. So, yeah.
You did an interview on Democracy Now! It's obviously relevant to this. Right after you'd come back from an international journalism festival, could you share with us a couple of things you said there about the percentage of the world's leaders who are authoritarians, and what I believe one of the leaders of the conference had to say about the fate of democracy in our country?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say, so what tech has enabled is the manipulation at the cellular level of a democracy, right? This was what I started with in the Nobel lecture. Do we still have agency? If we're insidiously manipulated, it's hacked our biology to change the way we feel. Fear, anger, and hate, the worst of who we are. If we change the way we feel, we change the way we look at the world, we change the way we act, we change the way we vote, right? Again, impunity, right? Segregation is illegal in the virtual world, in the physical world, but it is micro-targeting in the virtual world. So what has happened is the impact, and this is a VDEM report that was just released in Sweden in March. 72% of the world now is under authoritarian rule. We are rolled back to 1978 levels. We're literally in democracies electing illiberal leaders democratically. And VDEM, the leader of VDEM in Perugia at the International Journalism Festival, told us publicly that if the trends in America continue, that democracy here will die by the summer.
Yeah, you just subscribe to that yourself?
It depends on Americans. Mm-hmm. Actually, I've been really surprised by, the deer in headlights. When I listen to people say, well, we'll wait till the midterms, I was like, how do you know the midterms are even going to happen?
Well, here's what you talk about the comparisons between what happened in the Philippines, what happened in the United States. Duterte went after the press. He went after the court system. Obviously, Donald Trump has gone after the press, and in many cases, the press has knuckled under. When you think of ABC News not wanting to fight the president, or Paramount, which owns CBS News, going after 60 Minutes. So
LA Times, Washington Post, on and on.
But the courts so far have been standing up, but they're not holding
it
the
wasn't
president.
Designed that way, right? It doesn't happen fast enough.
It doesn't happen fast enough, and they're not doing what they could do, which is hold people in contempt for not. The president is defying the court. He's defying the Supreme Court at this moment by not going. They want him to facilitate Mr. Garcia's removal from the prison in El Salvador back to the United States. He's not doing that. So how are the courts doing, do you think? I mean, should they be holding people in contempt faster, and maybe starting their days at 7 instead of at 10?
I think more than that, you have to look at your legislature, right? It's the same thing that happened in the Philippines. Again, a very strong executive, those 3 C's, corrupt, coerce, co-opt. The legislature is the one that is designed to hold the executive in power in real time as possible, right? The judiciary really does work in a slower pace. Yeah. And then, and here's the part that, because it works at a slower pace, this is a lesson we learned in the Philippines. the rights you lose today, you are going to have to claw back with much more than you had if you were to hold the line today. Hold the line was our phrase, because I'm an old-style journalist. I never considered myself an activist. I'm a broadcast journalist trained in CNN. I opened the Manila Bureau and the Jakarta Bureau for CNN.
Yeah.
But, but when it is a battle for facts, journalism becomes activism. Let me pull two strands from what you said, right? So first, this is the way it works in every other failing democracy globally. And you can look at Hungary, you can look at the Philippines, you can look at Turkey, because there are cascading failures all around. Media capture enabled by tech. After media capture, you have academic capture. After academic capture, you have NGO capture. After NGO capture, you have state capture. And if you look at when an executive uses his power for vindictive political, to gain more power, right? That's state capture, right? We've lived through this in the Philippines, and every step of the way as you go up, crumbling the institutions, silence becomes consent. And I think what our executive in the Philippines realized was that if he can intimidate the people or appoint loyal people who don't know how government works, who are ignorant and arrogant, then he can control it. And Duterte did. He was the most powerful president the Philippines has ever had, even more powerful than our dictator in the 70s. I came to America because martial law was declared by executive order by former President Marcos in 1972, right? So ruling by martial law, again, the Philippines. Oh my God. You have such worried looks on your faces.
No, actually, it's funny because this is not a hopeful show for the most part, but to have someone like you, I mean this sincerely, it's one of the reasons we were excited to have you, to have somebody who did decide that she was willing to sacrifice for the truth, sacrifice almost everything, really means a lot to us, and I'm sure to our listeners. Well, I mean, that's true, Maria Ressa. So you're at the intersection of the opposite of sacrifice. You're at Columbia University, which was the first school to capitulate, I think is a fair term. And obviously you come from the media. We mentioned all these institutions. What do you attribute the decisions? I don't know if there's a common thread or not. What do you attribute the decisions to bow down rather than to stand up and fight to in all of these incredibly powerful places?
So I can't speak for Columbia University, but I will say that capitulate, right? They're all phases in a system of negotiation. And the very first question you have to ask yourself is, how do you negotiate with a bully? Right? This is asymmetrical power. And these are bully tactics. You're seeing this in our tariffs, in the U.S. tariffs, right? But I would say the other part, this is about power and money. And this kind of co-opting of power, right? Understand each step of that is the breakdown of rule of law and the consolidation of power in a very strong executive. And that can work if you're like a really visionary leader, maybe like Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew when he built it. But I don't know if we have leaders like this today. But sorry. So
but
to
by the way, do you think that
your...
you said I can't speak for Columbia? You can speak about Columbia.
Yeah.
They capitulated, my term, and so that they wouldn't lose their $400 million. As of this morning, they haven't gotten their $400 million back. So isn't there a moral to that story?
It's a moral every other country has learned. You give a bully a finger, they take your body. I mean, but again, the reason is I think that, have you really heard someone from Columbia University speak? So there are lots of, I think
we didn't hear Alan Garber
speak
until he was forced out of the closet by his own faculty, we would argue.
So this is actually, when you fight a dictator, you actually have to take the risk because if you don't speak, you lose automatically, right? So, but here's the thing. For everyone, it's not just those institutions, it's every single person in a failing democracy. If you do not reclaim your rights, if you are silent, you give consent, and every day you lose just a little bit more. America was most powerful at the beginning, right? Because you had all your rights intact. Now we can have people picked up on the streets in masks.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess in my thing, I think that, again, My lawyers told me I was crazy. So I don't know if that's crazy or not, but I will say that you hold the line because this is such a pivotal moment. And for Americans who are listening, where America goes, you take the world. Look at what's happened to the world. And the world will, now depending on the leadership of the EU. We're seeing President Macron step up, right? Keir Starmer. Now, what's happening in Canada? They just had elections, right?
Rejecting the Trumpy guy.
Right. So America, you got to wake up.
Well, okay. So I would like democracy to last past the summer. It would very much concern me if it's gone. So we should hold the line, but regular people, can't do that much, or can they do that much? And should everybody else be holding the line, like the newspapers, like the universities, like the law firms that have knuckled under? So those places have to hold the line. And what does the everyday Joe do?
Actually, heroes are not like the heroes are you, because when it's at the cellular level of a democracy, it is us. So let me give you from experience, right? Here's little Rappler, and I wake up and my president has attacked me on every single media nationwide. I always respected the office of the presidency, so I talked to him like he was Mr. President, right? But having said that, we went out of the virtual world. We moved into the physical world. Exactly what we are doing today at the GBH Media Summit is important because we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. That's the first. And it was so funny because then, the year I kept getting arrested, we kept getting our community rallied behind us. We had over $1 million I didn't even have a chief legal officer. And the money rolled in when we came under attack, and my sales team was so happy. And I kept telling them, this is not a sustainable business model, right? Getting arrested. But having said that, it's like Robert Putnam and Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
We talk about it all the time. Go ahead.
You have to bring your community together. And I think this is such a pivotal moment. Americans' ideals are why people flocked to America. Did something post-World War II with its power. So the question is, are you okay with the way America has transformed globally? And if you're not, what are you going to do about it? What are your communities? Oh, last, for media, why are you not covering both the corruption and the resistance, the pushback? Those are all happening.
Before you go though, you
not
deflect.
Not yet.
You deflect a lot away from you. And by the way, people, if you haven't seen the incredible Frontline piece, 1,000 Cuts, that's what it's called, right? 1,000 Cuts?
1,000 Cuts.
About Maria Ressa and her colleagues and whatever. Did you live in fear through this ordeal? And if you did, you're nodding in agreement. How did you fight through that?
So the first was, and in the chapters of my book, there's the macro title, but the micro, the subtitle is the personal lesson I learned, right? And one of the personal lesson is embrace your fear. So one of the things, because of course you're afraid. If people ask, are you afraid? Yes.
100 years in jail, I'd be very afraid.
But more than that, I live in a country where law enforcement is weak. Our institutions were weak to begin with. And targeted assassinations happen on the street, right? So what did you do? I listed down the worst case scenarios of everything, and then I worked backwards and planned it. And we workflowed it. So every quarter, we had a workflow for a shutdown. If a dozen agents came into the room to shut us down, what do we all do? We drilled it. That is in 1,000 Cuts, right? This is, by the way, 1,000 Cuts is how democracy dies. Not Taylor Swift's song, but it's literally like every cut bleeds out, and you have to realize that you're not even going to realize when the body politic is so weak that it dies. This is what happened in ours. Don't sleepwalk into the death of democracy is, I guess, what I'm saying. But I have 4 co-founders. We are all women. We came of age as journalists, as reporters. in the People Power Revolt in 1986, which began that pendulum swing back to democracy. I spent the beginning of my career covering the shift from strongman rule to democracy in Southeast Asia, in my part of the world, ending in 1998 with the end of almost 32 years of Suharto in Indonesia. But among the four of us, when trust breaks down, you have to have, the four of us had immense trust in each other. And we had no other business interests, but we also had a rule. Only one of us could be afraid at a time. So we passed the fear,
Incredible.
But it's those. Prepare for the worst, because if you embrace your fear, you are your own worst enemy.
Okay, I have one last
We have
question.
1 minute
I know you
left.
got to go. But, social media, Mark Zuckerberg, we spoke about him earlier, has decided he's not going to fact check anything. So I get texts all day long from people living in this alternative universe. They listen to him, they listen to Facebook, they listen to Fox News, they listen to wherever the President of the United States is lying all the time. So what's to be done about that, this world of guilt and fear and hysteria and lies? I mean, what do we do about social media when the leaders of it are saying, I don't care?
This is a corrupted public information ecosystem, the same way that BPL, that you guys are in the Boston Public Library, the government built the library, right? So the question there, and this is happening in Europe, what does a public tech stack look like in the virtual world? Because the ideal thing is that the laws in the physical world are echoed in the virtual world, but because of surveillance for profit, we're manipulated insidiously. 3 years ago, and Rappler is a partner of every single major tech company, including OpenAI, right? Including the LLMs. We haven't even touched that, but the enshittification of the internet literally is happening now, right? A year ago, Shrimp Jesus was trending #1 on Facebook, right? So, I mean, we are going to entertain ourselves to death is part of it. So 3 years ago, we began to build a matrix protocol chat app. We have elections in the Philippines on May 12th. I'm headed home today. And what we learned is that we need a public space where real people can have real conversations without being manipulated. And guess what? Our content moderation rules are like 10. They're the same things that you have in a public space. You can't scream fire in a theater, right? Those are civil things. And it is working. And my goal here, and again, because I'm tired of fighting Silicon Valley, you really have to look at the underlying philosophy of Silicon Valley, because it is against democracy, and it is against you, every person on every one of these things. And sorry, take a look.
No, don't be sorry.
Take your time.
Take a look at your terms. If you're on TikTok, you give away all your data, right? So what do we do? The Matrix Protocol chat app, we have an MVP in the Philippines now, but it is open source. It's oh my gosh, it's everything I've wanted to be. It protects your rights. There are no insidious manipulation of algorithms. But the last part is, what if we federate it? Connect to a login of a news organization, and you federate news globally. I am making the bet that people cannot live in an environment where they can't tell fact from fiction. Look, the tech idea of personalization for commerce was the idea at the beginning, right? But now imagine if each of us in this room have our own personalized reality, right?
Yeah.
That's called an insane asylum. Literally, this is why the world is upside down. Our incentive structure is upside down. So let's restore this. That's what we're doing. We've rolled it out in the Philippines. We're about to begin building in Indonesia, and then South Africa and Brazil. I'm starting in the global south. Because news organizations may not survive this time period if we stay in this corrupted public information ecosystem that Silicon Valley runs.
Can you join us every day for a half hour? Maybe just 20 minutes every day at the time. Maria Ressa, it was so great to spend time with you, and we hope we get to do it again.
No,
Thanks so much.
you. Thank you for having me. But this is it. This is the moment. This really is. Like, if 2024, with 74 major elections globally, was when we elected our 72% authoritarian, this is the year. So think about it. What's important to you? What are your values? And live it.
Maria, we hope to see you soon again. Thanks so much. Safe trip home. Good luck today at the summit.
It's an honor to meet you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Being
Pleasure.
here. We have been speaking with journalist, co-founder, and CEO of Rappler and the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Ressa, who stood up to a corrupt president with 100 years of jail over her head and all those criminal charges and having to wear a bulletproof vest and everything else. Thank you so much for being with us today, Maria Ressa. Coming up after a quick break, we're going to open the phone and text lines to talk about the economy. Despite promises of day one economic bliss, the economy is not thriving under the first quarter of the second Trump administration. Now's the time to start hoarding Christmas dolls. Call or text next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Native Plant Trust, celebrating 125 years of commitment to protecting New England's native plants. More information about how natives can support the web of life at nativeplanttrust.org. And MIT Sloan Executive Education, offering short courses on critical topics led by world-class faculty. Professionals can get up to speed on AI, innovation, cybersecurity, and operational strategy. More at executive.mit.edu. And Bay State Learning Center, a welcoming alternative to traditional schooling, committed to reimagining education as an adventure, where growth, purpose, and possibility lead the way. More at baystatelearning.org. And the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the Commonwealth's flagship public university. You can learn more about research, innovation, and economic impact for the Commonwealth at umass.edu.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Margery Egan, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Later in the show, 1 o'clock, we'll be joined by Jelani Cobb, who is head of Columbia School of Journalism. Tomorrow, we're back at the library. Before I introduce what we're talking about, I have to say, we've been doing this 26 years. That was as powerful 25 minutes as I have ever spent on radio or television. She is unbelievable.
Well, she's incredibly brave. I mean, she stood up. You know, people may forget
and
how he was
smart and strategic.
His way to go after the drug problem in the Philippines was to have people get shot.
Kill people every day, yeah.
There'd be like 30 or 40 bodies, and it was unclear how many of them were even doing drugs or involved in the drug trade. A lot of them were children. So she was standing up against someone that really could have had her killed.
Well, you know, we mentioned just in passing, and we should have spent more time on this, or at least mention at the top, the Frontline documentary, which is still available. I'm sure if you go to pbs.org or wgbh.org, 1,000 Cuts, is about Maria Ressa and her fight against this incredibly murderous dictator. And you should watch it, because I think you'll find it to be as inspirational as we felt the last 25 minutes was.
Yeah, and the most unnerving thing she had to say was that we could be doomed by summertime. It is now May.
Talk fast. 877-301-8970. We are changing gears a bit. But again, we're going to continue some of the same conversation with Jelani Cobb at 1 o'clock. Speaking of reporters from a White House cabinet meeting yesterday, Trump acknowledged that his trade war with China will have a negative impact on American wallets, though he downplayed it in the classic Trump fashion, blaming everything on someone who, as far as I know, is not president. That'd be Joe Biden, before offering this Christmas shopping advice.
You know, somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. But we're not talking about something that we have to go out of our way. They have ships that are loaded up with stuff, much of which, not all of it, but much of which we don't need.
$2 instead of 30. That's really inspirational. And it's all Kamala's fault or Joe Biden's fault, but not everyone's buying it. A recent CNN poll found a majority of Americans, strong majority, 59%, believe Trump's policies have worsened economic conditions in the country. Another report shows the final ships of cheap tariff-free crap from China have left port, so empty shelves are actually only a few weeks away. Another poll found this is the most painful. Another poll found 3 in 4 Americans, it used to be 40%, which was bad enough, currently live paycheck to paycheck. So we're doing another one of our, I think, timely economic check-ins with you. Are you bracing for headwinds, saving money or trying to save money, reconsidering how many dolls you're going to buy? I mean, how insane. The number's 877-301-8970. As I said, an economic check-in. And obviously this comes a day after the GDP fell for the first time, I think, since 2022. And there was a great, by the way, I don't know if you saw it last night. Anderson Cooper opens the show last night talking about how Trump is blaming Biden for the downturn in the economy.
Correct.
But when Biden was president and the stock market went up, Trump was posting that it was because Trump was going to win the election a year later that the stock market was rising. So his point was, when Biden was president, the good news was because of Trump. And when Trump is president, the bad news is because of Biden.
You know, there's awful stuff like about UPS laying off 20,000 people.
Well, they're ending their relationship with Amazon, which I have to say I don't quite understand. I guess it's not cost effective.
That's one of their biggest customers, but I thought that's a lot of people to get laid off. Not to mention all the people in the federal government that have been laid off. But anyway,
how about this paycheck to paycheck thing? Is that? I mean, I hope people don't just hear the words and sort of nod in agreement, understanding. I mean, think about what that means. That means if any problem occurs in your life, your car breaks down or needs an extra little repair, your kid needs an extra visit to the dentist, whatever it is, you're totally thrown off your ability to stay above water. I mean, how not only financially painful, but how traumatizing is that?
I think that one of the things that neither party has paid close enough attention to is that the middle class has been shrinking since the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And you have very rich people and people that are struggling. And people can't afford their rent. They can't afford to buy a house. They can't afford their child care. They can't afford college. They can't afford anything. And the wages aren't keeping up with that. And the cost of living has just gone through the roof. And I think, to talk about, how the stock market obviously matters in terms of, because so many people now have their retirement savings in the stock market. So obviously it matters. So it's half of the people. But to talk about, what the unemployment numbers are and, how the GDP is, it matters. But it doesn't matter much to hear it's great when you can't, afford to go to the grocery store.
Well, on that note, an anonymous texter says, dictator in chief, meh. So you kiddos only get 2 toys for Christmas. Whatever. All is good as long as I get my $90 million birthday parade. America's great and we're all winners. That was the $100 million potential. I don't know if it's happening on June 14th, his birthday. That's the intention. 877-301-8970. So I want to get your sense, your personal sense of the state of the economy. If you are among the minority who think things are moving in a good direction, I think it's somewhere in the 20%. And if you're not, what living paycheck to paycheck is like.
By the way, we're getting tons of texts about Maria.
Why don't you read one or two? If you want.
More Maria, please. Incredible segment. Maria was awesome. She should be on every day to give us a boost. Or more seriously, could you please ask if she could be a semi-regular? I mean, I don't know if she's going to be able to be semi-regular. She lives in the Philippines. She's got a lot in her
I'd say she's also a worldwide figure in great demand.
She is a worldwide figure in great demand. But, people want her on much more often. There was a really vicious text.
I'm not
going to read it, but it's incredible.
Well, because she speaks truth. They can't handle that. Sam, let's take some calls.
And by the way, somebody asked where Chuck Todd is. He had a scheduling problem last minute.
He'll be back next week.
He's got a great podcast talking about the kleptocracy, talking
Chuck
about
Todd does,
talking about all the billionaires going to make all this money under Trump and how much money Trump's family is making from crypto himself and these memes.
And that deal with Qatar, the whole deal they made with Qatar. Let's go to Sam in Lincoln to start things off. Welcome to the show, Sam. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. I just wanted to point out that a huge hunk of the so-called economy, which I think the economy is really about how the pie is sliced up. But anyway, a huge part of the economy depends on the redistribution of wealth and income.
Exactly.
And that happens by a number of means. The first one is taxes. So we might want to look at what the president is going to do for taxes. My understanding is there will be a huge cut of tax rates for the wealthy. and not much for everybody else. So what does that mean in terms of redistribution of wealth? It means there's less of that money to be redistributed. The other thing I'd like to point out is redistribution happens a lot through welfare programs. I believe our president would like to cut a lot of those programs.
That's correct.
My son, for instance, depends on Medicaid. So he depends on that program. Luckily, in Massachusetts, we have a pretty generous program, but a lot of that depends on the Medicaid program. Another program my son depends on is something called food stamps. So he gets a very generous allowance that helps him pay for food. Mm-hmm. He's on disability. He would not be able to afford to buy food without the food stamp program. And the last way that we redistribute wealth and income is through public services. And if I'm not mistaken, I think our president would like to cut back, and already has, on a lot of those public services. One of the main public services is through the healthcare system and doing research so we don't get sick. And those are the exact programs that he'd like to cut and already has cut way back on. By the way, thank you, RFK Jr., one of my heroes, and I'm sure one of yours. But anyway, that's my take on this so-called
Sam, that was
economy.
a fabulous, comprehensive take, and we really appreciate your doing it with us. Sam, thanks for the call. By the way, when he's talking about cutting programs, most recently, the Globe did a story on ROCA, this anti-violence organization that lost $6 million of their federal funding yesterday. And what we're trying to get the head of the organization on in the next couple of days, what the leader of the organization said is everything that they said the Trump administration was doing with which allegedly ROCA was not aligned, in their anti-violence crusade, is exactly what they're doing. And so everywhere you turn, Sam's analysis is perfect. He is hell-bent on making people poorer in every way he can.
Well, because they need to cut all this money. And by the way,
we're
learning now that Doge ended up costing us money because they had to put back a lot of the things they got rid of. What was it? Something like $160, $100 billion or something like that? I mean, we didn't save.
Remember, he was going to save $2 trillion out of the budget. Didn't quite get there.
But to respond to Sam's call, one of the things that's really going to be hurt, I think, in Massachusetts is mass health, because a lot of that money comes from the federal government.
Not a lot, half.
And Maura Healey has said over and over again that they don't have the money to make up the difference in those
many
programs.
Billions of dollars. By the way, the New York Times is reporting. Remember Michael Waltz, the national security advisor, who is the one who allegedly, mistakenly added Jeffrey Goldberg to that first signal chat, the guy who is the leader of the Atlantic. He is allegedly out. Now, what's interesting about timing, just as an aside for the moment, is Trump didn't dump him when he might have gotten an advantage out of it when people were paying attention to that, but dumps him now. Maybe because he doesn't want to admit that he ever is giving in when incompetence
He's got a little bromance with Hegseth. I think.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I think he's got to go, but he won't let him go. Listen,
877-301-8970. I'm sorry.
I'm living paycheck to paycheck. It is constant anxiety. I just found out I'll be furloughed for 2 weeks unpaid in July. I'm trying to figure out ways to earn extra money to put away for the 2 weeks unpaid.
It's horrifying.
And, this all goes back to this idea, and this started with Ronald Reagan, that, we're going to have trickle-down economics, that we're going to give all these huge tax breaks to these big companies, and the money's going to trickle down. Some people still, 45 years later, believe that.
I don't buy that. I think there's a difference. I think Ronald Reagan, I don't know this, actually believed in trickle-down economics.
I'm sure he did.
Donald Trump doesn't give a damn about anything trickling down to anybody.
That's where the disasters begin to happen. That's where the income inequality began to spread. Because the money was not trickling down, and the middle class has been shrinking pretty consistently ever since. Paula in Franklin, thank you for calling.
Hi, Paula.
Hi, I'm calling about the many, many times the Republicans talk about the tax cuts they're giving, but the media never challenges them and says, okay, so of those tax cuts, are you only going to give 2% of the tax cut to the top 2% wealthy people in the country? They never challenge them on that. They just say, oh, most of your tax cuts are going to wealthy people and corporations. But I'd like to see them, hold them to the fire, fire under their cuts.
Well, he's also talking.
Challenge them.
He's also talking about tax cuts, getting rid of them on Social Security and tips. Taxes on those things. I don't know how they're going to pull that off.
Which, by the way, would be so wildly expensive. The number of programs that are critical to people that have to be cut. Were they to do that, but those were campaign pledges, would be insane. Paula, thanks for the call. 877-301-8970 is the number. We're asking your reaction to the latest economic news and what your personal economic news is as well. I don't know if people understand. I didn't understand until I heard this thing on CNN last night.
Yeah.
This, we get so much from China. These the ships that have just left the ports there
are the last ones
that will not be tariffed. So come literally as close as 2 or 3 weeks from now, not only will there be fewer ships carrying less stuff, but that stuff which is being carried is going to be tariffed at an incredibly high rate.
They talked about how the West Coast is going to notice the difference first because that's where they land first, and then it could be by the end of May we're really going to notice a difference, and we're going to notice that there are far fewer things on the shelves as well. And by the way,
no, before you go ahead, tons of people, including, I'll read the top name, Teresa in Somerville, texted, can you release the text or audio from the Ressa interview so we can re-listen and share it? Well, the bad news for Marjorie and me, because no one's going to listen to the show, is it's already available at youtube.com/GBH News. You can rewind and listen to it. And by the way, even if it means you miss a few minutes of the show, if you missed Ressa from 11 to 11:30, you should miss her no more. She is
I think the overall message is all these people have got to stand up.
Fight. That's the message.
Especially the powerful
Fight.
people, the universities, the law firms, anybody that can fight back
the
is
media.
going to fight back. The media's got to fight back, yeah. And we're not doing that great of a job of it at the moment.
Marla in Westboro, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Of course.
I just wanted to respond back to the gentleman that was on the phone a minute ago talking about his son. I have a sister who is a disabled mental health patient, and she's on all the same stuff. She has SNAP payments, she has Medicaid, she has a Social Security disability income. She hardly has enough to live on as it is.
Yeah.
Never mind if any of her stuff gets cut. And I'm worried about it. I don't know what to do to help her out because if that happens, not only is it going to be really bad for her, but she will probably have another one of her breakdowns, because she can't cope.
That is a horrifying story,
Marla. You touch on the cost of living has just become astronomical, and
especially if you're living on a fixed income that's barely subsistence to begin with.
But I can't blame
Marla, thank you.
The Democrats are responsible for that too. I mean,
what do you mean?
Well, because they have kind of ignored this problem for quite some time.
Which problem?
They talk about it. They talk about we're going to get child care help. We're going to get help.
Yeah, but they're not talking about cutting Social Security, Medicare,
they're not. But
or Medicaid.
I think this is a both-party problem. I'm
not defending them as
Bernie
perfect.
Sanders talks about this all the time. The kitchen table issues, the cost of living, how you're going to get through the week.
No, but what he's talking about is what you expand. And I agree with you completely there.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things. For example, the things he wanted to add to Medicare, for things like dental and, was it hearing, I believe it was, kind of thing. But this is talking about cutting back on what Marla's talking about.
That's right.
Some of the most basic subsistence levels of income that our government provides the people who need it.
Because it has become so expensive to live in the United States of America. Listen to this from Penelope.
Marla, thank you, and good luck with your
Duxbury.
sister.
So many of our medical supplies, sterile disposables, non-sterile disposable protective wear, et cetera, in our healthcare facilities come from China, and she's concerned that tariffs will cripple healthcare delivery. You know what else? You mentioned RFK Jr. I just wanted to mention that his new idea is that we should test new vaccines with placebos.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, back in the COVID days when you had to wait in line, you had to get online with that nightmare to get a vaccine. You get down to Gillette Stadium where a lot of people went to get their vaccine.
You get a placebo.
And, and you're either going to get the COVID vaccine, which is going to keep you from getting very, very sick.
Or you're going to get COVID.
Or you're going to get the placebo. And you're just going to, just tough it out. I mean, is he out of his mind?
Yes. Ellen in the car, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi. The thought of people 3 out of 4 living paycheck to paycheck is terrifying. I think it's why he keeps coming down on the interest rates, because he just is fine with Americans like borrowing to pay their regular bills and being indebted into their grandchildren. And this whole idea that it's going to be tough on Americans and, everybody, he's not hurting. Nobody in his circle is going to be hurt by this.
Well, Ellen, that's a great point.
About
Go ahead, Ellen.
Go ahead.
His callousness about the two toys, the two dolls, and they might cost a little bit more. All I could think of was that Santa Claus cartoon with the Burgermeister going, toys? He's just a nightmare. He just does not get it. It just is unbelievable. And people are going to be put in bankruptcy. And like I had said to your screener, it's not corporate bankruptcy. It's like real life bankruptcy where they come and they take all your stuff.
Ellen, I wish I had said what you said.
Yeah,
that was great. Thank you.
What I was going to say is that when you're surrounded with billionaires and his cabinet is full of billionaires, they don't really understand, that you may not be able to get anything more than $2 at Christmas time. It's like that when that guy Lutnick, who's like a billionaire, said, well, my mother or mother-in-law, whatever it was, wouldn't be upset if her Social Security check didn't come 1 month.
She just wait a week.
And you're thinking, because you're a billionaire and you could give her some money.
Can I say one thing, though? There have been a lot of wealthy people in politics through the years. Some of them, despite the fact that this day-to-day thing doesn't affect them personally, actually understand what life is like and have empathy for people who do live paycheck to paycheck.
Been anything like this.
No, I'm saying exactly the opposite of this. I'm saying he doesn't do it just because he doesn't have an experience. He doesn't care. He has no empathy. You heard what Musk, his hero, had to say. Empathy is the worst thing that's happened to Western civilization.
Right.
They care about nobody but themselves, even if they do understand the pain they're causing.
But there has been a lot of studies showing that the richer you get, the harder for you it is to understand.
Right. I'm just saying there have been some rich politicians and others who've given a damn about poor people.
The Kennedys,
among them, yeah.
They had no money compared to these people. I mean, Elon Musk just lost $164 billion or something, and he's still the richest guy on
Well,
earth.
there's a governor of Illinois who you're fond of, by the way, who's worth many billions of dollars. He's done a lot of good things for low and moderate income people in Illinois.
Right.
So it's not always aberrational. Trump and his people are aberrational. Sarah in Somerville, hello there. You got a minute.
Oh, hi. It's Susan, though. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi.
I just have... Yeah, no problem. I just have three really small points. First of all, I don't think the purpose of Doge ever was efficiency. I think that's a pretext. I think the whole point was to cripple the government because by firing people, they're now they're being paid on administrative leave during all these lawsuits. So they're being paid to stay at home. So that's hardly efficient. And the remaining people are distracted, worrying that they'll be paid. So that's hardly efficient. And then also, I don't want to be a horrible, mean person, but honestly, people need to feel the pain of the economics before they understand this huge mistake that we made. And then also, Jim, your point about, taking the credit for the Biden administration, blaming the Biden administration, that's a Republican tactic that seems to have gone back 20 or 30 years. And we Democrats never figure out how to use that. I wish we did, but it always comes back. It always hurts us.
Well, it may be an old Republican tactic, but I don't know any Republican in the past who has claimed when somebody else is president with a year left in his term, like Joe Biden had when the stock market was at its highest, that the level of the stock market was because of the candidacy of that Republican, in this case, Donald Trump.
Listen to this.
Thanks so much for your call. We appreciate it.
I want to run this in real quick before we leave. I'm 66 years old, live paycheck to paycheck. I've never had a lucrative job, but I've worked for the last 50 years full-time, the last 46. Sometimes I don't fill up the gas tank. I'll do $10 here or there until I get my next paycheck and minimize what I spend at the supermarket. I'm safe and I've always continued to be, but it is a long time struggle, and that's somebody that's worked for, as you said, 50 years.
Can I say one more time? We're being deluged with Maria Ressa praise. Please go right away, youtube.com/GBH News. It's available now. Watch it during the news break and then come back.
Okay, coming up after the new news, you're going to be joined by Jewish Council for Public Affairs CEO Amy Spitalnick, who's going to talk about how Trump's supposed attack on anti-Semitism really is not about anti-Semitism. You're talking to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
It's not over yet. More smart conversation about community issues up ahead with Jim Braude and Marjorie Egan on Boston Public Radio, right after a news update from NPR. Stay with us here on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and Bridgewater State University, helping create jobs for Massachusetts and working to connect industry leaders to graduates, elevating business in Boston and beyond. bridgew.edu/elevate. When a young, delusioned doctor leaves the UK, she moves to South India and finds work at an understaffed and overworked hospital. Watch the series premiere of Good Karma Hospital tonight at 9 on GBH 44.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Jim Braude, ahead on Hour 2 of Boston Public Radio. Amy Spitalnick is the CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. She joins us to discuss the weaponization of anti-Semitism by the Trump administration.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Then today is Mayday, an international day of action for the labor movement. We'll speak with Jessica Tang, president of the American Federation of Teachers of Massachusetts, on that and what Trump's attacks on education mean for us here. All that plus two more things next on the second hour of Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The House of Representatives has voted to repeal a federal waiver allowing California to set strict emission standards for cars and SUVs. That comes one day after the House similarly voted to nix two California rules about heavy trucks. The Senate will need to vote before the waivers would actually be repealed, and there's a good reason they might not. NPR's Camila Domonoske explains.
California's vehicle standards, like a rule requiring all new cars to be zero emission by 2035, can be followed by other states if they choose. Supporters call the rules necessary for the climate and human health. Critics, including some automakers, call them unrealistic and costly. The Biden EPA granted California waivers so it could set those standards, and two nonpartisan government entities say the House doesn't have the ability to revoke waivers through the mechanism it's using. Despite that guidance, the House voted anyway. Now the question is whether the Senate will too. Camila Domonoske, NPR News.
DOGE is driving 2025 layoffs, according to Challenger Gray and Christmas. Today, the outplacement firm cited the impact of President Trump's government-wide cost-cutting entity led by Elon Musk for job cuts. It says they've reached pandemic-era highs. More than 275,000 jobs in March, more than 100,000 cut this past month. However, April's figure represents a 62% decline. The White House says its new minerals deal with Ukraine creates a fund governed by 3 board members from each country, where each country will receive half of royalties, license fees, and other proceeds from national resource projects in Ukraine. Speaking to reporters on condition of anonymity, a senior administration official says the agreement also includes oil and gas. Today is Israel's Independence Day. Its annual celebrations regularly include honors to its security forces and soldiers. But this year, those receiving tributes are shielding their identities for fear of reprisals abroad. NPR's Daniel Estrin has more from Tel Aviv.
At this year's ceremony, the names of honored soldiers were classified. Photos of them only showed the backs of their heads. The military says it's to protect them. Pro-Palestinian groups have been publicizing the names of soldiers who served in Gaza, seeking their arrest abroad on alleged war crimes. At another tribute, 3 Israeli Mossad intelligence agents, donning sunglasses and masks, were honored. They were identified as agents who led the operation of the exploding pagers and devices in Lebanon last year, targeting Hezbollah, that killed dozens and injured thousands, according to Lebanese authorities. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
At last check on Wall Street, the Dow was up nearly 200 points. You're listening to NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Hundreds of Massachusetts lawyers, judges, clerks, and other legal professionals are rallying at the Parkman Bandstand on the Boston Common this hour in support of National Law Day of Action. It's a nationwide stand for the rule of law. According to the Law Day of Action website, the core principles of the day are to uphold the rule of law, defend judicial independence, protect the independence of the legal profession, and promote public understanding. The fishing season for cod, haddock, and flounder opens today, as Vivian Law reports. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration issued an emergency ruling this week.
The move comes after weeks of delays due to Trump administration cuts at NOAA and changes to how the agency sets limits for cod. Massachusetts officials say they are happy the season will open uninterrupted. But the temporary rule is only effective for 180 days. NOAA still needs to approve final regulations. The agency says proposed changes to cod fishing would be delayed until next season. Federal cuts also held up regulations for scallop fishing earlier this month. The Massachusetts fishing industry brings in more than $20 billion a year. For the New England News Collaborative, I'm Vivian Law.
Red Sox, Blue Jays wrap up their series tonight in Toronto. And in the forecast, we are looking at a mostly sunny day, partly cloudy today, high in the low 70s, chance of showers overnight, low 50, sun clouds in mid 70s tomorrow, and then Saturday we get about a week of rain. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indiana University, establishing the IU Launch Accelerator for Biosciences to drive healthcare discoveries and train the next generation of innovators. More at go.iu.edu/IULab.
Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. We are streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. I want to tell you today is day 2 of the great GBH Media Summit. We spoke with Maria Ressa, and we'll be talking with Columbia's Jelani Cobb. He's the dean over there at the journalism school later in the show. Tomorrow, we're going to be back at the Boston Public Library with live music from the thrice Grammy-nominated Skylark.
Excuse me.
That's right. 3 times, Jim. I was trying to be fancy.
I knew what it meant.
Skylark Vocal Ensemble. Hello again, Jim.
Hello again, Marjorie. Our next guest has been an outspoken voice against the weaponization of anti-Semitism in Trump world. She's here as part of that GBH Media Summit panel. Hers is moderated by Ann Curry on bridging the religious divide in media and politics. Amy Spitalnick is CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. She stopped by Studio 3 earlier today. Amy, it's great to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I said before we went on the air, I saw you on CNN. I was so impressed, and I found out you were a classmate of our lead producer here, Jane Bologna. I said, we have to get this woman on.
Get that woman.
Immediately,
yes.
immediately. And now here you are. Thank you very much
Thrilled to be
for
here.
joining us. Because you were one of the first people I heard basically call out the president on what I think you have called, and correct me if I'm wrong, kind of it's not really about anti-Semitism crusade. So why do you think that?
Well, look, multiple things are true at the same time. We know that anti-Semitism is real, and it's rising. It exists on college campuses, including here at Harvard, at Tufts, my alma mater, and a number of other places. And at the same time, we're seeing this administration exploit the Jewish community's legitimate fears and pains in this moment to advance an agenda that seeks to undermine democratic norms, rights, the rule of law, and undercut our academic institutions. And none of that makes Jews safer. It's intended to pit communities against one another, to cut to the core of the democracy that has been so inherent to Jewish safety and advancement and the safety and advancement of so many other communities for generations. And so when we see the exploitation of these very real concerns, it does nothing to combat actual anti-Semitism while fundamentally undermining the norms and values that have been so inherent to the Jewish community for so long.
You know, you said a second ago, it does nothing to make Jews safer. We've argued on this show, but you know much more than we. It's actually worked to make Jews less safe in this country. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, look, we're seeing now in both directions, the extremes on the right and the left, use what this administration is doing to foment further anti-Semitism, and it's deeply dangerous. If this administration were serious about countering anti-Semitism, there are so many things it could do. It would invest in programs like Title VI and the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Ed, which is the very tool we have to protect Jewish and all students on campus in K-12 schools and on universities. Instead, this administration has decimated and gutted OCR offices around the country and made it impossible for there to actually be oversight and investigation of the civil rights of students. They wouldn't be appointing neo-Nazis and other conspiracy theorists to positions in the Department of Defense or otherwise. They wouldn't be advancing and normalizing deeply anti-Semitic and bigoted conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement and invasion rhetoric that's used to underpin anti-immigrant and other policies. So if this administration were serious about countering anti-Semitism, there's so much that they could do and invest in, but this is really intended to pit communities against one another and fundamentally undermine our democratic norms.
You mentioned replacement theory and the infamous Jews should not replace us. You ran an organization in your past life that actually brought litigation around Charlottesville, did you not?
That's right. I ran an organization called Integrity First for America, and we very proudly worked on behalf of 9 Charlottesville community members who were injured in the violence in August of 2017. I think when many of us watched those images of Nazis with torches chanting, "Jews will not replace us," we were confused and shocked, but we knew that it was certainly frightening. What we've now seen is that those ideas, this idea that there is a Jewish conspiracy to replace the white race with black and brown people, immigrants and refugees, have moved from the fringes to the mainstream of our politics, underpinning so many of these policies and being normalized and advanced by people in the highest positions of power. And so while we very proudly won that lawsuit in fall of 2021, a multi-million-dollar judgment against the 24 Nazis, white supremacists, and hate groups that orchestrated the violence, it's also a testament to the work that we need to do to build the societal resilience against these conspiracy theories and hate that have become so mainstreamed in the years since.
That's the voice of Amy Spitalnick. She's the CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs.
There's something that I didn't know much about, and I'm sure I'm not alone. This 2016 International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance that changed the definition of anti-Semitism and has been changed further under the Trump administration. So explain what that's about.
So there is a very extensive debate in the Jewish community and in Washington more broadly around this question of how we define anti-Semitism. And there are a number of definitions out there. There's the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition, there's Nexus, and there's others. And IRA, as this definition is known, is a valuable tool and resource. We at JCPA have a resolution that we adopted a number of years back that point to it as a valuable tool and resource. But we say this should not be a legally binding definition. It shouldn't be codified into law because of the civil liberties concerns that it raises. And so our approach is that we shouldn't be allowing these definitional fights to be red herrings that distract from the actual constructive policies and investments we need. Investing in protecting civil rights, investing in countering hate crimes, investing in building the democratic resiliency that's so inherent to Jewish safety. But instead, we oftentimes see these definitional fights become these red herrings that don't allow us to invest in and advance the comprehensive whole of society, whole of government approaches we need to keeping Jews safe.
That definition, by the way, is what's incorporated in the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that's encountering some free speech opposition, I think, by people like you in the Senate.
And I think because it says that criticism of Israel is just by itself anti-Semitic, which I think is hard for some people to understand given what's going on right now.
Yeah. Well, it's a little complicated because, IRA has been interpreted by some to make that case, or I would say exploited by some to make the case. But in general, if the way that many should read, I would say IRA, the Nexus definition, which is also a really valuable tool, and others, is that there is criticism of Israeli policy, which is important and fair. And then, of course, yes, there are places where that criticism can and does cross the line. We've seen that in the last year and a half since October 7th with, for example, my own synagogue being targeted, or the firebombing of Governor Josh Shapiro's home, apparently by someone who wanted to hold him accountable for, quote, what's being done to the Palestinians, right? There's very clear ways in which we've seen purported criticism of Israel cross the line into anti-Semitism. But that's why it's so important to be clear about where that line is and not conflate all criticism of Israeli policy as inherently anti-Semitic, because it makes it that much harder to actually call out and confront when it becomes anti-Semitism.
Well, criticism of Israeli policy or anything that's pro-Palestinian, as we learned by another Tufts person, Ms. Ozturk, which we'll discuss in a minute. Is Tree of Life your synagogue, by the way?
No, Tree of Life is not my. I live in New York, but Tree of Life, I'm very proudly serve on the advisory board of Tree of Life, where the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in U.S. history happened in October of 2018 by someone motivated by the Great Replacement theory.
And you also see just around synagogues in Boston and Brookline, where I live, and there's a ton of synagogues, they've got security out there every single day, and it's ominous.
It's ominous. And I would say, look, again, to this question of what can this administration do to actually keep Jews safe? They wouldn't be cutting the nonprofit security grants that synegogues and other institutions rely on for the actual physical safety.
You know, there's a piece in the New York Times today, which I assume you saw, by Michelle Goldberg. I can't believe anyone thinks Trump actually cares about anti-Semitism, which is one of the points you make. It's one of the points in an op-ed in the Globe recently that a teacher of yours at Tufts, Alan Solomon, who's been on the show plenty, made. In her piece, she says, this is Goldberg, I've been astonished to learn that some people believe that when the administration attacks academia for its purported anti-Semitism, it's acting in good faith. Speaking on CNBC last week, Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, cheered Trump's attempt to exercise political control over Harvard. When I listen to Greenblatt and people like that, I am not convinced, and maybe you know, I don't know if you're a mind reader or not, but you know these people. Do they really believe this, or is it another form of obedience to the ruler that we've seen in so many institutions, universities, the press, etc.? What do you think the motivator of the Greenblatts of the world are?
Look, you know, there is very real fear in the Jewish community, and that's understandable. There has been, over the last decade, a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, and since October 7th, we've seen it spike exponentially so, including on college campuses and in so many other places. And it's important to acknowledge that. We have to be clear-eyed about the fact that anti-Semitism is real and is rising if we're going to actually effectively address it. But the solution is not to acquiesce to Trump's attempts to use those fears and concerns to undermine democracy, both because it's a pretext. If there was a seriousness about countering anti-Semitism, there's so many specific policies and investments they can make. But also, at the end of the day, Jewish safety is inextricably linked with inclusive democracy. And if we as Jews think that this is going to start and stop with some pro-Palestinian activists on some college campuses, we're fooling ourselves. We've already seen the slippery slope over the last 2 months since the initial arrest at Columbia. We saw right here in Boston with the arrest of the Tufts student, seemingly for an op-ed she wrote in the Tufts Daily, with no other implication of anything she did wrong. And so we understand the slippery slope that attacks on democratic norms and rights and due process and civil liberties leads to. We as Jews know this throughout our history better than anyone. And it makes it all the more important for us to say we can confront anti-Semitism without abandoning the core democracy that's been so important to our safety.
Yeah, you did. Do you think that the motivation of people that Goldberg's talking about, and again, I don't mean to single out Jonathan Greenblatt, but obviously he's a very high-profile person, is it because they're scared of Trump and trying to curry favor like so many other formerly courageous souls, the tech guys, the university, well, some university leaders, many leaders in the media? What's the motivator there?
Look, I think at the end of the day, the ADL and others are genuinely committed to countering anti-Semitism, but we have a disagreement on this front in terms of the best way forward. And we're seeing this not just on issues of the Jewish community and anti-Semitism. We're seeing it with, of course, universities more broadly. We're seeing it with the law firms. We're seeing it with the attacks on public media, right? This is all part of a tactic by the administration to bully institutions that really are at the core of our democratic society, into acquiescing to his policies, to his worldview, to squash dissent. And if we can't allow it to happen, whether it's with universities, whether it's law firms, whether it's media, or whether it's with any other institution, because again, it's a slippery slope here.
Do you get blowback from the MAGA people?
Sure. I get blowback from the extremes in both directions. If you ask the folks on the right, I'm a self-hating Jew or a capo. And if you ask the folks on the left, I'm a genocidal Zionist. So, you know, my hope is that if you're getting it from the both extremes, we're squarely in the place where most American Jews actually are.
Well, you know, that's what I find so hard to understand, and maybe it's my own lack of knowledge or naivete or whatever, that you can hold two things. I mean, before October 7th, we saw thousands of Israelis take to the streets upset about some of Netanyahu's policy over there in the Supreme Court and all that kind of stuff. Then post the terror attack by Hamas, obviously thousands and thousands of people taking to the streets saying we need to get these hostages back. These horrific stories about people being kept in these tiny tunnels and all the terrible things that Hamas did to these people. On the other hand, you're seeing constantly the horrors of what's going on in Gaza with people starving and continued attacks and attacks in the West Bank. We had that Academy Award-winning film about the West Bank. Couldn't even get a distributor in the United States because there's such...
and then the producer was attacked.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. But I guess it's why can't we hold those two things? Because the Harvard study came out and saw all these incidents of horrible anti-Semitism on campus, kids afraid to go to Hillel, kids afraid to go to Shabbat dinners, all that kind of stuff. And then they had the Muslim students saying they feel silenced and abandoned because there is no way for them to protest what they see going on in their own with their own ancestors in some cases. And in the case of the young man from Vermont, he grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp. So that's, why can't we, what is so hard about that?
Yeah. Well, look, the entire conversation, I would say, around Israel, around anti-Semitism has been painted in these false binaries, that you're either 100% with Israel or you're with the Palestinians, that you're either against anti-Semitism or you're against Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate. But in fact, we need to actually be able to hold multiple truths.
Yeah.
And the only path forward, both in terms of Israel and Gaza and in terms of protecting Jews, Muslim Americans, Arab Americans here, is one that recognizes our safety is deeply intertwined. And so particularly post-October 7th, a lot of our work at JCPA has been helping people hold multiple truths and carving out space to do that we can be horrified by the attacks of October 7th, the deadliest attack on the Jewish community since the Holocaust. We can demand that the hostages, and there are still hostages in Gaza, we can demand that they be released immediately and be horrified by the conditions that they've been in for over a year and a half. And that doesn't take away from the horrors that people feel about the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza, the belief that there needs to be Palestinian humanity and dignity and self-determination alongside Israeli humanity, dignity, and self-determination. And that's also true here. The reports that came out of Harvard this week underscore that, again, anti-Semitism on campus was real. Jewish students, faculty, and others were marginalized or discriminated against or otherwise made unsafe. And that can happen in parallel to the fact that Muslim American and Arab American students and others also did not feel like their rights were being protected on campus. And these are not mutually exclusive. We need to be able to confront all of this together, not just because that's the reality of it, but also because at the end of the day, the only solution is one in which all of these communities are truly protected.
Amy Spitalnick, as you and Margie were talking, what I had forgotten about until that second is I can't, and we weren't alone in this, we were so meticulous, not immediately after October 7th, but immediately after Netanyahu responded, to never talk about this without saying both things. By the way, what happened on October 7th was absolutely unimaginably horrible, because the fear was if you don't say that before you talk about how the Palestinians are being dealt with, then you're not sympathetic to or empathetic to the pain that obviously Israelis
or you're anti-Semitic.
Suffered. But because of Netanyahu's relentless campaign against the Palestinians, I sort of have to plead guilty. We don't do that nearly as much as we do anymore. We don't begin those sentences by saying what happened on October 7th and what Jews need to live with because of Hamas and others. Do you know what I mean? And because of the relentlessness of the Netanyahu thing, and obviously the support of Trump, and I would argue not enough strength exercised by Biden vis-a-vis that. Is Netanyahu's crusade going to continue to be a problem here in the United States?
Oh, look, I'll say a few things. I think one, and look, this is true in many different directions, right? Sometimes we just need to be able to talk about whatever the thing is that we're talking about. And this is true whether it's about something horrible that's happened in Gaza or, something I often hear from colleagues in the Jewish community and that I feel myself in certain moments is that sometimes it's hard for people to say, this is anti-Semitic and I'm going to call this out as anti-Semitism without conflating it or connecting it to other forms.
Do you ever hesitate yourself when you're about to say something like that?
Oh, I think it's important that we think about the actual reality, right? So if an act of anti-Semitism happens, call it out as anti-Semitism, and we don't have to say, and we reject all forms of hate, right? If an act of racism happens, call it out as racism.
Yeah.
If an act of Islamophobia happens, call it out. And we need to be able to do that without conflating it with all forms of hate. But we also, at our core, need to recognize that our safety is interconnected. And so not only is it the right thing to do to call out attacks on any person's humanity or safety or dignity here or in the Middle East, but also it's in our self-interest in the long term to do that because our safety is deeply interconnected. And so it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. And to your question about Netanyahu, I was just in Israel a few months ago. I was there when the Bibas children's bodies were returned. These are the young red-haired kids who had seemingly been killed months and months ago at this point. And what's fascinating is the ways in which Israelis are able to hold complexity around these issues. I was in Hostages Square, which is sort of the central gathering place for Israelis. And the vast majority of Israelis, according to poll data, both, are horrified by the attack on their country and their people on October 7th. They are out on the streets week after week demanding the release of the hostages, and they're calling for a ceasefire deal that would get the hostages home and end this war once and for all. And they, for the large part, oppose the Netanyahu government. And so it's really important as well that we here in the United States not conflate the Israeli people with the Netanyahu government, because much like here, the people in the government are dramatically different institutions.
I do not want to be conflated with Donald Trump's.
On that note, though, we've seen, I don't know, I haven't. I know that not so recently, 6 months ago, whatever it was, Israelis in polls, strong support for Trump's position on this. But speaking of Alan Solomon, who we were talking about earlier, he texted me this morning saying that the poll of American Jewish voters, a minority, a very small, like in the 30% range, actually support how Trump has been dealing with anti-Semitism. Are you reading the same things?
Yeah, so there has not been a ton. It's really hard to poll the Jewish community because we're so small to begin with. But when there is a poll, I think it's worth looking at. There was a poll that came out last week that said I think 71% of American Jews generally are not comfortable with how the Trump administration is approaching this fight against anti-Semitism, particularly vis-a-vis college campuses. And so that tracks with our experience. We were out there early saying these two things are true at the same time. Anti-Semitism is real, and we shouldn't see it exploited to undermine our democracy and rights. And while maybe institutionally it felt a little lonely for a period of time, I'm out traveling the country on a weekly basis in communities. I was in Michigan, I was at Columbia University, I was in so many places that are on the front lines of these issues. And our position felt really aligned with where so many regular Jews were. And in particular, the other week, we put out a communal statement led by JCPA, but with our colleagues in the conservative reform and reconstructionist movements and other mainstream Jewish organizations representing a significant majority of American Jewry, saying the same thing, that again, anti-Semitism is real, but it should not be exploited to undermine our democracy and our academic institutions.
Well, one thing that drives me crazy is...
One of many things.
One of many things drive me crazy. But the criticism of certain religions that people know nothing about, like there's very conservative Catholics, there's very social justice leftist Catholics, there's multiple kinds of Judaism, right? You get Conservative, Reform, Orthodox, you get, I always mispronounce it, Hasids, right? I mean, you get all these different groups of with very different views. You've got black evangelicals and white evangelicals that are diametrically opposed on most everything. So I think sometimes people conflate, because there's not as many Jews as there are Christians, mix them all up together is what I'm trying to say.
The Jewish community is remarkably diverse. We're diverse in terms of our perspectives on things, in terms of our relationships with Israel, in terms of so many things. There's Jews of color, there's LGBTQ Jews, there's immigrant and refugee Jews. And so when we talk about our safety being interconnected, it's not just because we know when there's an attack on one community, it leads to the attacks on others. It also fundamentally is an attack on the Jews who also hold those compounding identities.
Amy Spitalnick, one last thing, at least from me, as we mentioned, you're a Tufts grad, and we were critical of how the president of Tufts, his statements immediately after the snatching of Ozturk off the streets of Somerville, because while he came strongly to her defense, said we will defend international students, we were troubled by the fact, and I think I speak for Marjorie here too, that he went out of his way not to go after the Trump himself and his people for the snatching, for the disappearance, for whatever you want to call that happened there. We got a lot of criticism from some tough grads who thought it was unfair. But, when you talk to, as we did last week, the president of Mount Holyoke, the president of Wesleyan, who have been direct and forceful in their criticism of Trump, it sort of reinforced in me that the Tufts president should have gone farther. How did you feel about that?
Well, look, it's complicated right now because the very tactic of this administration is to try to bully institutions by using federal funding, research funding for things like cancer and Alzheimer's and so many things that are inherent, right? And so university presidents are in a really tough spot. I think it's why it's that much more important to be clear about values. I will say, as a Tufts alum, I was gratified to see Tufts file a declaration in that case, which was, I believe at the time, the first university to actually file a declaration on behalf of a student. And so that, at the very least, was gratifying. And I made that clear to the administration at Tufts and to others. And also at the same time, it's going to require all of our universities, Tufts and Harvard, every other institution, to continue to push back against the bullying by this administration that is intended to squash dissent and the independence of our universities. And so this is not going to start and stop with this one specific case at Tufts. It's going to require Tufts and all institutions to build a really strong backbone as these attacks continue.
Before you leave, we should have asked you up front. Our apologies. Tell us briefly about your organization.
Yeah. JCPA, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, has been around for 81 years. We were founded during a really dark time in Jewish history when Jews here were trying to figure out how they could help European Jewry and recognize that building cross-community coalitions was a core path to building Jewish political power, to supporting the Jewish community and ultimately advancing the inclusive democracy that's so inherent to our safety. We, are a co-founder of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, whose board I proudly sit today. We mobilize Jews for the March on Washington and Selma. And today our work is really focused on this deep intersection between Jewish safety and democracy, both that the Jewish community needs to be showing up and mobilizing for democracy and for the rights and safety of all, because our safety depends on it, and because Jewish safety is inherent to inclusive democracy. And if we are going to truly have inclusive, multiracial, multi-faith democracy, it requires confronting anti-Semitism and protecting the Jewish community alongside so many other marginalized communities.
We're thrilled to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Speaking out. Thanks so much. We hope to see you again, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk to you. We've been speaking with Amy Spitalnick.
Jamie a critical part of your formative years when you were at Tufts?
Oh, sure. Jamie Allen. This is like if you're the ways in which Tufts jumbos still many years later are part of my life.
You haven't mentioned Scott Brown. What happened to that?
Oh, no, I forgot about that
one.
Did Scott Brown go to Tufts?
Of course.
He did?
And a basketball star indeed.
Oh,
Come on.
I didn't realize that.
The ultimate jumbo.
We did not overlap.
Okay. He slid in, I guess,
More ways
basketball.
than one. Good to see you, Amy.
We've been speaking with Amy Spitalnick. She's CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. Very much appreciate your time, Amy. Coming up after a quick break, Jessica Tang leads the Massachusetts branch of the American Federation of Teachers. She's here ahead of a Mayday rally on Boston Common. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
In a Great Recession, people had fewer kids, so fewer students in 2026.
Which means colleges are desperate. I'm Kurt Carapezza from GBH News.
And I'm John Marcus from the Hechinger Report.
We look at how schools are dealing with the demographic cliff on our podcast, College Uncovered.
Listen wherever you get podcasts.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you and Lexus Broadway in Boston, presenting Kimberly Akimbo, the new musical by Boston native David Lanzia-Bear and composer Janine Tesori, May 6th to 18th at the Emerson Colonial Theater. More at lexusbroadwayinboston.com. And Samet's Blackstone Associates, providing brand-focused strategy, content, cross-media design, and fundraising support to help mission-driven organizations build and deepen relationships. More at sametz.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Jelani Cobb, head of the Columbia School of Journalism, will join us at 1 o'clock in the studio. We'll be back at the library tomorrow. Governor Healy joins us at the library for an hour on May 9th. Attorney General Campbell on the 13th. And we're still getting just inundated with feedback on the incredible half hour with Maria Ressa It's already at youtube.com/GBH News. You just rewind it, but why don't you wait till 2 o'clock so you can hear the rest of the show. Got some pretty good people, including Jessica Tang, president of the American Federation of Teachers from Massachusetts. She joins the head of a Labor Day rally on Boston Common tonight at 5:30. It's for Mayday, International Day of Action for the labor movement. Jessica, it's great to see you. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Yeah, thank you so much for coming in, Jessica. So you've got a big event today at 5:30. Tell people what it's all about.
Sure. So it is International Workers' Day, as Jim just shared. And, the quick history of that is it was actually, the very first one is in 1890. And it was following the Haymarket incident and another incident in McCormick, where workers were actually peacefully demonstrating and going on strike for an 8-hour workday. And unfortunately, they faced police brutality, and many workers actually died. And so Mayday was then declared in 1889, the first one being again in 1890, and it has become an International Workers' Day, really uplifting the importance of labor and the workers that came before us, who honestly actually gave their lives to fight for things that I think we take for granted today, like the 8-hour workday. And also, historically, has also been a big celebration also of the contribution of immigrants. And so that's really what today is about. But also about the theme this year is for the people, not the billionaires. And so we can certainly talk more about that, of course,
And
too.
who else is going to be there besides you?
Sure. So it's actually a number of unions that are anchoring it. Just off the top of my head, we have grad student workers, we have 509, SEIU 509, the Mass AFL-CIO is one of the sponsors, and it's a number of unions, but it's also immigrant rights groups, and it's also community groups. And so we really are joining forces also with other organizations, even like 5051 and Indivisible.
Can we talk about the labor side of this just for a second before we talk about some education issues with you? The National Labor Relations Board is a pretty important place. It's in the process of being gutted, like everything is being gutted that protects workers and low and moderate income people in this country. My understanding is there's not even a quorum. There are only 2 members left. Right. There is a chair who is from the management labor side, who's not very sympathetic to workers, who is Trump's nominee. With the National Labor Relations Board, disemboweled, for lack of a better expression, that's going to be a pretty rough road for people either organizing or people trying to fight back against unfair labor practice and violation of basic rights for workers. What's the antidote to that, Jessica Tang?
That's absolutely right. For those who don't know, the NLRB is essentially like the watchdog of labor unions, and there are millions of workers when their workers' rights are being abused or the working conditions are not what it should be, then can go to the NLRB to get that sorted out. And so essentially right now it's been gutted, and there are not actually enough appointees to have a majority to make any decisions. And so the concern, again, is that we're going to have millions of workers who are going to actually have less worker rights now. And, it's not even just the NLRB. We're talking about the Federal Mediation and Conciliation services as well. We've used that before.
It helps deal with impasses that exist between unions and employers.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, it's not a surprise that billionaires like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are against the NLRB and that this is happening. It is extremely related to, highly related to the, I think, backsliding of democracy. And again, what we're fighting for today on May Day, which is that, we as the American society need to be about lifting up better working conditions and better lives for regular working people, in that the working people should have the power, not the billionaires. And we, unfortunately, I think, have a huge divide right now where it's tilted in the wrong direction. And that's why we need working people to come together and fight back. And that's what this May Day is about.
We're talking to Jessica Tang. She heads the Massachusetts branch of the American Federation of Teachers. President Trump wants to get rid of or decimate the Department of Education. So tell people why that could impact or hurt them in Massachusetts.
Sure. So we're talking about federal funding and the oversight of that funding. And we're talking about, even just Massachusetts, $297 million that's at risk. We were proud to be a part of the first lawsuit, actually, in the nation to actually challenge the dismantling of this Department of Education, because we know that it will harm those that are most vulnerable, whether that's our low-income students through Title I funding, whether it's our special education students, whether it's career voc tech expanding career and voc tech opportunities for students, whether we're talking about student loans. They oversee a lot of these grants and funding, and that's what's at risk, and that's why we had to sue.
And what's the status of the litigation?
Well, the oral arguments were actually last Friday, and I thought the judge made a really actually interesting kind of example of he was getting clarity about what the plaintiffs were actually fighting for, and the defense had basically said, well, we don't think that they're standing to say that the Department of Education has to rehire all the workers. And he's like, well, I don't see it like that. He said, I think it's more like if you want to go to Dunkin' Donuts and get a cup of coffee, but you fire half, which they have, of the Department of Education workers, then you can no longer get that cup of coffee.
So what that means is say you have a kid with some sort of special need that maybe has ADHD or maybe has something more severe. The federal money pays for a lot of that education from the teacher or maybe from the transportation if the child needs to go to a special school that's not in their district, that kind of thing?
That's exactly right.
That's exactly right.
So that's IDEA funding from the federal government, and it specifically, again, is supposed to go to special education students. And the worry, though, is if you have no one in the Department of Education who has any oversight of where the funding is going, then unfortunately it can go to places that it shouldn't be going. It's not actually serving the students it's supposed to serve.
One last thing about the Department of Education, I think this has been a big thing from the Republicans for a while because they think, what do we need the Department of Education for? And I think I talk about this a lot with Jim, that there's been kind of a loss of faith in the public schools. Do you think that's unfair?
I do think it's unfair in that we've also been seeing unprecedented challenges, particularly since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the reality of not just the resources of schools that even in Massachusetts have actually over time decreased, which is why we were advocating for the Student Opportunities Act here, but also the reality of how a lot of new developments, whether it's social media or, again, post-pandemic challenges with social mental health, are impacting our schools. And we have a lot of work to do to make up for a lot of those new challenges.
Should we get rid of the phones?
That actually is real legislation that's being discussed right now.
Do you guys take a stand on this at the Federation of Teachers?
Yeah, we have discussed it, and generally educators are in favor of some kind of policy around phones because there is a lot of research to show that it's quite disruptive.
That forum I did the other night, by the way, that you were ridiculing me about over at Endicott was about whether classrooms should be phone-free.
Was there?
Had you been there, you probably would have learned quite a bit.
Was there a consensus on whether they should be phone-free?
72% of teachers in America support it. 67% of parents in America support it. So, and by the way, Kathy Hochul in New York just passed in New York. No New England states have it, but Andrea Campbell, who will be with us on the 13th, and there's a couple of legislators have filed bills here, the Study Act, et cetera. When people focus on the Department of Education, I know, I wanted to say, for everybody out there who says, well, it's, we got to reduce the size of government. Who is the person listening to the show who thinks reducing the size of government meant taking money away from special education? Is there one person other than the cruelest human being who thinks that that's a good reduction in spending in the federal government? But what I also wanted to mention, what they're doing in the Department of Education, which also has, I think, a lot of potential damage because it may benefits particularly kids of color, is getting rid of the Civil Rights Division that deals with things like school discipline. Mm-hmm. Explain what those kinds of issues are and why that matters, Jessica Tang.
Sure. I mean, that's, again, one of the reasons we are concerned about what happened to the illegal firing of the federal workers in the Department of Education. One of the departments that was gutted was the Office of Civil Rights. And this is the department that ensures, again, a lot of our students who historically have not had equal opportunity or access to quality public education have oversight and intervention and specific policies that are aimed at, again, addressing those historical divides. And we're not also just talking about race. I think sometimes when we hear civil rights, we're thinking just about race.
What are we talking about?
We're also talking again about students with disabilities. Whether they have access to things like wheelchair ramps, or for our deaf and hard of hearing, they need very specific facilities, for example, that they're not going to hear, for example, fire alarm. They need to have lights that are flashing, right? And so having those civil rights offices ensure that our students who haven't always had access have access. It's gutted now.
Does the state have a comparable unit, I should know this, either in our Department of Education or elsewhere, that would allow people who have complaints to seek some sort of justice if it doesn't exist in the Department of Education federally anymore? Or is it purely a federal deal?
Well, I think there are definitely safeguards in places like Massachusetts. And, in blue states, I think there are some additional protections. But our worry, again, is, I'm here as the president of AFT Massachusetts, but I also am a national vice president of AFT. And we're looking at a lot of the red states, and we have great concerns. Right.
Well, even in a blue state, we've talked a lot with others, including the governor, by the way. The reality is, even with the millionaire's tax, which the legislature was not willing to do what it should do around money for transportation and education, so the people did it themselves, luckily. $2.4 billion the last couple of years each to education and transportation. Despite that huge additional funding thing, the reality is the state's not going to be able to fill the holes that the federal withdrawal of funding for the things you talked about are going to create. So what happens?
Sure. So actually, we were proud to be a part of the Raise Up Mass Coalition that fought for that. And now we are actually fighting for a corporate fair share tax. It's called GILTI, GILTI. And basically, it's I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but basically there are multinational corporations that are basically able to shelter taxes that should have been paid in Massachusetts.
And pay the minimum tax of $456, which is totally ridiculous.
Well,
but even if that were to become law, I'm sorry.
Even if
it were to become law, that's down the line. What happens now to the funding deficits for the state and for cities and towns based upon, assuming they get away with it, the withdrawal of federal funds?
Right. Well, so the good news, again, is Massachusetts is one of the wealthiest states in our nation, right? And so we do believe that there's a lot of legislation that we've actually are supporting that can help bring funds to our schools, because the reality, though, and this is what's, most, I think, stressful about this, is that even before the federal government threatened to stop funding for, Title I funds, for example, that just happened, if they didn't get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we were already seeing a fiscal crisis because the ESSER funds had already run out. And so we have a lot of districts right now that are facing layoffs already, and also relying on local tax overrides, because it's kept at 2.5%, in order to be able to level fund schools. And so whether or not the federal government was already threatening to decrease funding, we were already in a situation where we needed the legislature to step up and fill some of those gaps. And that is absolutely what we're spending a lot of our time doing right now.
I wonder, this is a little out of the box, but because property taxes do fund so much of the schools, and rich towns have more than poor towns, have you guys ever thought about some kind of different way of funding, maybe regionalization or something like that? Because,
that's what, the reform, and I didn't do the whole 9 yards, that Paul Reville, who sits in here quite regularly, when he was Secretary of Education, that's what they did, is tried to equalize it with more state funding so that poorer communities were not screwed because they have a smaller tax base and lower income.
But they still are screwed.
Differential,
that the funding of the schools is one of the big problems. It is in Massachusetts, but certainly in more poor states in general. That's a big problem.
It is a big problem. And, like Jim said, the formula for the funding was changed, and it is due for a review. Actually, it's supposed to be done every 10 years. And what we're seeing, though, is it definitely helped. It was supposed to help, which was the gateway cities. But Boston is a very unique situation because theoretically it's a wealthy city, but disproportionately the students who go to BPS are not. And so I could get into the weeds on that, but they're not quite helped by SOA. But neither are a lot of the rural or suburban districts that we're seeing are facing a lot of these funding crises right now, too. And so that's why we're asking for the inflation cap. There was an inflation cap that didn't keep up with inflation. That needs to be fixed. There are regional transportation is another way that more districts can get funding. And I do think Boston should be considered one of those regional districts because we have Dover, Sherborne, or Lincoln, Sunbury. But Boston transports a lot of students, but doesn't count.
And also, RFK Jr. is always talking about autism. He's going to cure it, I think, in about a couple of weeks. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But until he cures it.
Yeah, by getting rid of vaccines, not a problem.
There's more and more kids with autism. And that's an issue for the schools, obviously.
Right. And I will say this, too, is that, with the dismantling of the Department of Education, they're saying, oh, well, we'll just put some of these other, portfolios under Health and Human Services. I don't know about you, but I don't think special education is something I want RFK to be in charge of.
Yeah.
Jessica Tang,
I think he's got some special education needs himself.
You mentioned that at this rally this afternoon at 5:30, and we'll have you at the end tell people again where it is, immigrants' rights groups are going to speak as well. We've heard from doctors that undocumented people are either not going for checkups or needed appointments, or their kids not going because they're afraid of getting snatched. We've talked to some people in your business, the education business, about the same thing. Are you seeing lower attendance in schools across the state because of this fear?
Yeah, we have absolutely heard that in places like Chelsea and New Bedford,
where there's a large
Lawrence,
Latino population.
right? Or when the correlation is when there are large ICE raids,
I see
then next day or two that there'll be lower attendance, and that absolutely is a huge issue. Again, schools are supposed to be safe and welcoming places, and the fact that we have families and students who are afraid to come to school, honestly, is a huge issue, and it's really weighs on us.
I hope people think about that for a second. A person who doesn't have to live with that. Imagine waking up in the morning and being too afraid to send your kid to school for fear that you'll be gone or he or she'll be gone before the end. It's just unimaginable in this country this happens.
Right, or the child comes home and this happened in the first Trump administration and their parents or loved ones are not there anymore.
I can't. So we have a minute left. Tell us again, May 1 is today, 5:30, where and what's happening there, Jessica Tang, please?
So 5:30 at the Parkman Bandstand is where one of the rallies is, but I have to tell you, there's dozens of them across Massachusetts.
Oh,
there's
really?
Yeah, there's one in Chelsea, there's one in Lynn, there will be an event a couple days in New Bedford, there's one in Springfield, there's actually another one in Boston, earlier today too, and there are actually over 1,000 events actually happening all across the nation today. And
but the Boston ones,
it is in Boston Common, Parkman Bandstand, beginning at 5:30, and then we'll have a speaking program, and then be marching actually to the Copley Library.
Oh, great! Oh, one of our favorite places. Great to see you, Jessica Tang. Good luck this afternoon.
Great to see you
Thanks
too.
so much.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with the president of the Massachusetts Division of the American Federation of Teachers, Jessica Tang. Thank you very much, Jessica Tang, for coming in. Coming up after a quick break, just enough time, Jim, for two more things. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, Harvard is facing questions after turning information over to the Department of Homeland Security in response to Trump administration demands. A major project to revamp the Mass Pike in Alston could be at risk. And Alabama now has 2 black members of Congress out of its 7 seats in the House of Representatives. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Support for our programs comes from you. And GM Roth Design Remodeling. Dreams delivered. With custom kitchens, bathrooms, and additions. Serving New England for over 39 years. Learn more at gmroth.com. And North Shore Music Theater, presenting The Shark is Broken, a behind-the-scenes comedy of the making of Jaws. On stage at Bill Haney's North Shore Music Theater, May 2nd through 11th. Ticket information at nsmt.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan and Jim Browdy. We're streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. And speaking of streaming, that's where you can see any of the things we've done today already, including the Maria Ressa interview from 11 o'clock to 11:30. Just check it out, rewind a little bit. Now, the good news is for two more things. Yesterday, Marjorie's excuse for not having one was the boiler broke or some cockamamie thing.
Hot water heater.
Did anything break today? Or
No.
You're actually going to do it?
I'm ready to go. Yeah.
Okay, here's Marjorie's two more things.
So
one more thing.
Imagine if I started every show this way. I said, Jim Browdy, you were the most brilliant, insightful,
thank you,
otherworldly interviewer. I mean, you leave them all in the dust. Tim
Thank
Russell
you.
and Ted Koppel and Walter Cronkite, even
That'd be
Edward
great.
R. Murrow.
Why don't you do that?
Well, I think even you might find that a little bit much, but not Donald Trump. Yesterday, he had a 2-hour cabinet
This is
meeting,
unbelievable.
and there was so much slobbering over Trump that even right-wing commentator Ann Coulter said, would it be possible to have a cabinet meeting without the Kim Jong-il style
Is that true?
tributes?
Oh, I didn't hear that. That's
so,
great.
Here's just a little snippet of the slobbering. Here we go.
Mr. President, it's been an honor to be part of it for the past 100 days.
Mr. President, the last 4 years, the world experienced a total lack of zero leadership under Biden. And then we've had 100 days of your leadership with respect, with strength.
President, your first 100 days has far exceeded that of any other presidency in this country, ever. Never seen anything like it. Thank you.
President Trump, in your first term when I had a chance to work with you as governor, you were courageous. When you probably assembled the greatest cabinet ever, you're actually fearless.
By the way, the second guy got fired today. Obviously, the servile attitude didn't work. Mike Walls.
Yeah, I guess not. But, Trump really isn't fearless. He's fearful, obviously, because if you need somebody slobbering over you all the time, what is that the biggest sign of? Insecurity. He is a quivering mass of insecurities, and everybody has to pretend otherwise. Go ahead.
Well, there are a couple of things. One, did you hear? I don't know which one of the cabinet secretaries also said, and I think we'd all agree. I'm paraphrasing. This is the greatest cabinet ever assembled in the history of the presidency.
I think that was Burgum. I think he said that too. Yeah.
By the way, you left out. You have more here. We have some fawning from the first cabinet meeting, which happened. What?
You want to hear that?
Sure. Let's hear a little of that. To get in the
here's
mood.
the first cabinet.
And the honor and respect we have for each other is a reflection of you and your leadership.
You were overwhelmingly elected by the biggest majority.
At the Trump EPA, we're going to make you proud.
Let me say, one of the people said in that first soundbite there, we've never seen anything like it. And Jamie said in our ear, it is true. We have never seen anything.
No,
like
I know.
it.
Remember George Kearns Goodman's great book about Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah,
Team of Rivals, right?
Sure, yeah.
He wanted to be
Team of
challenged.
slobbers.
He wanted to be challenged. JFK, the best and the brightest. He wanted to be challenged. Something's wrong with my microphone, I think.
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not.
You said
Okay.
it beautifully, by the way.
Okay.
And by the way, if you would start the show saying some of those things about me, no, really, I think the show would go a little better. In any case, I have a similar thing. While we're discussing Trump attacks on the press all day with Maria Ressa at 11. We'll continue in about 10 days with the Dean of the School of Journalism at Columbia, Jelani Cobb. There's another Trump supporter who's doing his best to discredit the press as well. That, of course, is Bill Belichick. Now, do not go away. This is not a low-rent discussion like we had the other day. This actually matters in a big way. After the humiliation of the CBS Sunday morning interview with Belichick and what's Jordan's last name again? I'm sorry. Hudson interrupting his girlfriend, his professional and personal relationship. He says, Belichick puts out a statement after the embarrassment right out of the Trump playbook saying that CBS News lied.
Oh, yeah.
They had agreed to limit the interview to just the book. They edited the interview unfairly, etc. CBS responds like any credible news operation would by saying that they never agree to limit interviews to these narrow things. And let me put this in context. Margie and I have been on the air for 26 years. Have we ever once agreed with an interview subject that certain topics were off limit? The interview subject can say, I choose not to answer. That's their right.
We've
never done it once.
Not once.
And the notion... The notion that, whatever. So Belichick is lying, as Trump does about the media every day, from the photoshopped MS-13 on the hands of Abrego Garcia to the 200 countries he's allegedly negotiating tariff deals with. My point, when people like Trump and Belichick are trapped or embarrassed or exposed, an apology would be the appropriate thing for a normal person, but not them. It never is. Attack is the only route. Don't buy it from Trump. Don't buy it from Belichick. Two Ps. and a very uncomfortable pod, Marjorie Egan.
Misquoted, badly edited. You know what it is, Jim?
What is it?
The last refuge
of scoundrels. Exactly.
I'm not talking about this.
Exactly. She isn't, but we are. That's the difference.
Talking about it. Oh, my God. That's all the time we have. Coming up after the 1 o'clock news, Columbia Journalism School Dean and New Yorker staff writer Jelani Cobb. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Public Media Giving Days are a time to celebrate the impact public media has had on you and your community, and to join together in giving back. Donate right now.
Give online at gbhnews.org.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And M&M Skylights, located in Stoneham, installing and servicing the full range of Velux skylights that can help bring air and more natural light into your home. Skylight consultations can be scheduled at mmskylights.com. And the Omni Boston Hotel at the Seaport, helping plan weekend trips with accommodations, weekly jazz nights, a 24-hour art gallery, and a range of amenities. More information at omnibostonhotel.com.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News, what matters to you?
I'm Jim Browdy, ahead on Hour 3 of Boston Public Radio. Jelani Cobb is Dean of the Columbia Journalism School and publisher of the Columbia Journalism Review. He joins to discuss the state of academic freedom, campus free speech, press freedoms, and widespread capitulation by major media institutions to Donald Trump.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Then a happiness check-in. Yesterday we talked about avoiding being unhappy despite Trump living in your brain. Today we're going to go forward and say, how are you being happy? Shutting out the noise and enjoying your daily life. How about breathe in, breathe out, and be grateful you can still breathe. That's next in the third hour of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The U.S. is hailing a landmark deal with Ukraine. Both countries have set up an investment fund to share profits from the sale of Ukraine's critical minerals and raw materials. NPR's Joanna Kakissis reports from Kyiv the partnership gives the White House incentives to keep investing in Ukraine's defense and reconstruction from its war with Russia.
Ukraine's economy minister, Yulia Svidenko, who led negotiations on the deal, said revenue for the investment fund would come from new licenses for critical raw materials and natural resources. Volodymyr Landa of the Center for Economic Strategy in Kyiv said an earlier draft smacked of colonialism. The signed deal, he says, does not obstruct Ukraine's path to the European Union.
And stipulates that the military and the financial assistance provided earlier will not be counted as debt.
The deal does not provide explicit security guarantees, but the fund can be used to finance new military aid to Ukraine. Joanna Kakissis, NPR News, Kyiv.
Big crowds this Mayday are hitting the streets of major cities around the globe, including Washington, D.C., to call attention to the struggles and gains of the labor movement. In the U.S. specifically, many activists are targeting President Trump's policies, including those affecting immigrants and federal workers. 22-year-old Isabella Cabrera traveled from New York to rally on the National Mall.
I brought a sign that says they want to divide us, but we are stronger together. I believe full-heartedly in this because the division in the United States since Trump's re-election has been very tense. I can feel it when I walk out of my dorm, and I can feel it when I step foot off campus. And I think that is a fear tactic that the Trump administration is trying to instill in us.
Field reporting provided by NPR's Windsor Johnston. Well, under Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Department of Health and Human Services has made steep cuts to staff and services. NPR's Selena Simmons-Duffin reports on a new poll.
Thousands of federal health workers were fired on April 1st as part of a major reorganization at agencies like the NIH, the FDA, and the CDC. The nonpartisan health research organization KFF asked Americans in mid-April whether they agreed with the statement, quote, "The administration is recklessly making broad cuts to programs and staff, including some that are necessary for agencies to function." 6 in 10 people said yes, including 92% of Democrats, while 87% of Trump supporters said that the administration is, quote, "carefully making cuts to programs and staff to reduce fraud and waste." People of both parties opposed cuts to Medicaid, however. Selena Simmons-Duffin, NPR News, Washington.
U.S. stocks trading higher with the Dow up more than 150 points. It's NPR.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Members of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community are pushing Beacon Hill lawmakers to take a look at bills that matter to them. That's with today marking the start of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Advocates at the State House made the case for several measures, including one that would increase access to trained interpreters and educational settings. Josephine Kuo with the Asian Community Development Corporation says programming in languages like Mandarin and Cantonese can help people connect with their neighbors.
There's this idea that people who are not fluent in English do not want to be involved with their community. And this is completely not true.
Advocates are also backing legislation on affordable housing, data privacy, and protections for immigrants. In Massachusetts, Governor Maura Healey tells a Mashpee Select Board member, no tolls for you. The tolls in question were the suggestion of Select Board Vice Chair David Whedon, who said the state should consider collecting tolls on the Bourne and Sagamore bridges. According to the Cape Cod Times, Whedon says those tolls could generate $70 million a year, but Healey says she does not support tolls on those bridges. In sports, Red Sox Blue Jays wrap up their series tonight. The Celtics have their second-round NBA playoff schedule. The series will start in Boston on Monday, May 5th. In the forecast, partly cloudy, low 70s today. Chance of showers overnight, low around 50. Sun, clouds, and mid-70s tomorrow. 64 in Boston right now. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, committed to giving job listings increased visibility with relevant candidates through its sponsored jobs feature. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Welcome to hour number 3 of Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Going to be back at the Boston Public Library tomorrow. Governor Maura Healey is going to join us at the library on May 9th, and the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, will be with us also at the library on May 13th. Hello again, Jim.
Hello again, Marjorie. A hell of a day here on Boston Public Radio. Earlier in the show, we spoke with journalist and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa, then Amy Spitalnick of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. They're at GBH as part of GBH's media summit. And so is our next guest. He is Jelani Cobb. He's the dean of the Columbia Journalism School and the Henry R. Luce Professor of Journalism. He's also a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. And notably, we spoke to him about this a couple of years ago, the editor of the Essential Kerner Commission report, a recontextualized look at a critical study commissioned in the 60s by LBJ into the roots of race, inequality, and police violence in America. Dean Cobb, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, Jim mentioned Maria Ressa kind of knocked everybody's socks off after what she went through in the Philippines. But she talked a lot about big media kind of capitulating.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen it with CBS, ABC. You've seen it with lots of places. So why are we doing this?
I don't know what the
internal calculations are around this. There's some people, their theories. One theory is that people are wary of getting into legal fights that can open up, a pathway to set precedents that will ultimately curtail press freedoms in a more substantial way. So, that's the most charitable read that people have on this. And so they're settling cases in order to, kind of protect the public good. The more cynical, skeptical version of this is that, this is just kind of what happens with corporate media. People are thinking about their interests in various ways, and in the same way that, Jeff Bezos is a famous example. His Blue Origin has a ton, federal contracts that are all vulnerable, and the Washington Post and its coverage of the White House is contingent upon that. And so...
and he, of course, pulled the editorial endorsing Kamala Harris, as people know.
And we saw that at the Washington Post. Right. That's on the other side of it. I don't know where it actually comes down. I can tell you that I think the net effect of it will be negative in a very significant way.
What do you mean by that?
So we're seeing these unprecedented attacks from a presidential administration on, the media, and, highly questionable constitutionality. And if we are if our response to all of them is to duck, or to find ways to pacify the administration, then it makes it that much easier for the administration to impose its will upon other types of media organizations.
Well, we had this discussion in a different context with Maria Ressa about how when you give in to the bully, you don't really ever get anything. ABC capitulates in this whole issue of George Stephanopoulos saying rape instead of sexual abuse. Virtually every legal scholar in America, conservative and liberal, said there's no chance ABC will lose this case. They settle it. They give him $16 million for his library, $1 million in legal fees. He ends his interview with Terry Moran 2 days ago saying ABC is the worst network. I don't even know who you are. So what the hell did they get out of the capitulation? Nothing.
Yeah, there's not a one-to-one relationship between those things.
Yes.
And so, we've seen that in a lot of different contexts. And, this is not a person that adheres to boundaries very well. And so these are all... dynamics that people should be thinking about when they're considering making these kinds of deals.
Jelani Cobb, Ressa was talking about the parallels between her situation, what Duterte did to the press there, and you had this fabulous interview, forum, whatever, with one of the newspapers that has not capitulated, the New York Times, Sulzberger, who runs it the other day, I think, at your school, in which he talked about a piece he wrote, I think, late last year.
Yeah, September.
An op-ed piece about the authoritarian playbook for crushing press freedom. And the horrifying thing about it is it's perfectly tracking what the first 102 days is like, is it not?
Yeah, it's the model. It appears to be the model, that we've seen inspiration from people like Viktor Orban. And one of the initial things that authoritarians do is crack down on the press because they want to remove independent sources of information. They want to remove avenues of criticism and so on. And the same thing in the Philippines, in Hungary, in Brazil. You can kind of go around and find time and time again. This is how it plays out. Yes, that's what we're seeing, or at least we're seeing an attempt at that same sort of playbook here.
You've mentioned in some of the things I've read about you, Margaret Sullivan, who was ombudsman for, was she at the Times, the ombudsman? She was at the Washington Post, I know, for the ombudsman, and she's a media critic, and she's been critical of the Times, too, saying that their headlines are too normalizing. So you're a fan of hers, it sounds like.
Oh, I mean, she's my colleague, and I'm a big fan of her before she became a colleague. But yeah, she's a colleague, and I think that the Columbia Journalism School objectively has the best journalism faculty in the world. And so
why do you like her? What is good about her? What is good about her critique, do you think?
So one is that Margaret Sullivan has been in a leadership position. It's not like she's making in leadership positions, but she's been an editor-in-chief. It's not like she's making these kind of judgments from some sort of abstract place or from an office chair, somewhere. There is a relationship between how you frame a story, especially recognizing often that, the headline may be the only part of the story that someone reads.
Yeah.
Not that we advertise that. No, we think that's a good idea.
She's got a point, though. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And so, at the same time, I think that, no news organization is perfect. Obviously we partnered with the New York Times on that event that you just mentioned. I was really thankful that the Times was willing to, the AG was willing to write that piece, and that the Washington Post, which I have also been critical of just 2 minutes ago, was critical of. The Washington Post ran it, though. They published that piece, about the threat that a Trump administration could pose to freedom of the press.
Some things are more subtle. I think for those who don't do what we do for a living, one of our most recent pieces wasn't just about the headline, was about executive orders. And that while most responsible journalists mention in the story that executive orders are not laws, they're an order that may have the force, may in all likelihood don't, that it's mentioned so far down the story that people never get to it. That may seem like a nuanced thing. To me, at least, it's not nuanced at all.
Well, that's also basic journalism. You're supposed to provide that information as close to the surface as possible. When you're foregrounding the story, what we call our lead, you just lay out that information and then you give more detail and nuance as you go into the story.
So, Jelani Cobb, you made a comment, I don't know, fairly recently, for which took a little bit of blowback. You said, nobody can protect you. These are dangerous times. Who were you speaking to, and what were you trying to say?
So that quote has become the bane of my existence. So I was speaking to a group of students who were at a town hall. When I spoke to the journalist, this was an off-the-record conversation that was nonetheless recorded and transmitted to the Times, which had its own implications. But when I spoke to the journalist about it, I said, they were verifying the quote. I said, if you give that quote in isolation, that will give a kind of different impression of what I was actually saying. When the thing that I was actually saying was that we have to actually do this work, that we have to report, and that we have to also be careful. I said that this is a time, because it's a dangerous moment, it requires equal measures of caution and courage. Because I'm talking to a group of 22-year-old journalists, very many of whom are visa holders. It would have been wildly irresponsible for me to send people out to do things that could get them deported with having no ability to impede their deportation, but saying, yes, let's go rush the barricades together. And so I was trying to convey that we have protocols around safety and around caution for a reason. We still do the work. We still have to go out and report. We still have to cover people who are antagonistic to us. But we have to rigorously adhere to the protocols that are meant to keep us safe. That was what I was trying to articulate.
Hey, is it unfair to say that to some degree that it's a call for responsible, if this is not oxymoronic, self-censorship? Is that unfair?
No, absolutely not. So I think, I don't think it was like responsible self-censorship. Well, I don't think it was, we were calling for self-censorship at any point. We're just simply laying out the landscape, and saying, so our legal counsel gave the advice that legal counsel would give. Like when you deal with a lawyer, what they generally tell you is to reduce your risk. And they're saying if you have something on social media, you might want to consider deleting it. They didn't quote, but our counsel also said, I think that everything that's happening is unconstitutional. And I think that everything that's happening is illegal. But if people aren't following the law and they aren't following the Constitution, we're now in extra legal territory.
People like the Trump administration.
Right. We're talking about the administration. Right. We're talking about the administration. If you're in an extra legal situation, you have to actually take things into account that you wouldn't have to take into account if you were in an actual normal situation.
So I want to stay on self-censorship, even though you said it didn't apply there, and ask you to settle this dispute, for lack of a better expression. Marty Barron, who's also here for this summit, was with us a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about Ruth Marcus and leaving the Washington Post. And in a piece she wrote in your magazine, in the New Yorker, she courageously, at least to me, admitted...
Not my magazine.
Well, I know, but I mean...
Right, I'm a staff writer there.
Exactly, okay, my apologies. But a wonderful magazine, I would say.
Wonderful magazine.
Nevertheless. She admitted that in two instances, one about, I think it was the tech bros, and once about Trump himself, I'm not 100% sure I'm right, that she pulled back what she intended to say and made it softer. That's her admission about the thing. So the question we asked Marty Barron was, do you worry that reporters, like at the Washington Post, are not editorialists, reporters are pulling back what they're saying, even if it's maybe not conscious? He said, absolutely not. I talk to reporters all the time. I'm convinced. The next day, Chuck Todd was on the show, and we asked him the same question. He said, I speak to my fellow former reporters at NBC News all the time, and I can say to you unequivocally, yes, they are. Reporters are pulling back on what they're saying. Where do you think the truth lies?
I mean, it's probably both, honestly. And I don't mean to say that just to split the difference, but, I know journalists who are not going to bend no matter what, and, people who are just kind of like constitutionally not able to do that. You have other people who might, and I'm not making judgments here, but I'm just saying that temperamentally, this is like a case by case kind of basis for people. The thing though, and I'll go back to Marty, when I became dean, I took him to lunch and, I wanted to get, his feedback on leadership. He's led, 2 major news organizations. And I was like, well, what have you learned over the years, being in leadership positions? And he said something that was very valuable to me. He said, your job as a leader is to create the context in which your people can do their best work. That's it.
Huh.
And, the problem is that these news organizations, the question before them is, are you creating a context in which your people can do their best work? In many of these instances, the answer is going to be no. In some of these situations, hopefully the answer is yes. But generally, if we are deferring to the administration, if we are settling cases that we could win, if we are thinking about the way that this leverages our other interests as opposed to the interests of the news organization, then no, we're not doing that.
We're talking to Jelani Cobb. He's dean of Columbia Journalism School. And Columbia Journalism School is probably the preeminent journalism school in the country. People want to go there to learn to be journalists. But I think how different it must be now. Like when I was a kid, Woodward and Bernstein, they were standing up against the President of the United States. We were supposed to, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. It was kind of a heroic business you thought of. At least I did when I was young, thinking about becoming a reporter. But these kids are in such a different world, or not all kids, I'm sure some of them are in their 20s and 30s, but it's a different place entirely, or at least somewhat now.
So it is and it isn't. There are a lot of barriers to journalism now, just the questionable business model, the shaky employment prospects, the fact that we've had this decline in prestige and trust, and the fact that it's physically a more dangerous job than it was in this country, certainly, and even around the world. All those reasons. But people still come to journalism school.
Yeah.
And those people are very much in the Woodward Bernstein mold. They believe in the power of the press to make a positive impact in people's lives. They want to report. They know what a story is. They want, the tips of how you get, people to talk to you. They want the tips of how you research, how you report, all of those things. And if you want a source of inspiration, talk to, and I'm not just talking about the crop that we have at Columbia Journalism School. When I talk with my peer deans, we're at a point where we have some of the most sharp, well-trained, established young minds coming into this field that we could hope for.
Well, I thought you had something very interesting at the end of one of the pieces you wrote about how to build more trust. That if people could see, explain that to people about if
show
you
your
get
work.
Yes,
yeah.
Explain what you said.
So I think that because we keep going back to this fabled era where people trusted the media, and we had this really super high trust, and I'm not sure we should have trusted the media. One possibility is like there's a decline in trust across the board for institutions, and we have to grapple with the question of, is this an unwarranted decline, or do people trust us less because they simply know more about us now? Like, that's a real question. And so we can't ask for the public's trust. In fact, we should ask the public to not trust us. We should say, we will show you our work. Here is this article. here's a link that will tell you everything we did to get to this article. Here are all the documents that we consulted. Here are the people we interviewed. Here's the time that we interviewed them. We got an anonymous tip. We can't divulge that person's identity, but we look at all the reporting that we did around this.
Yeah.
So it's like the ingredient label on food. Like, you know exactly what it is you're consuming. That has the benefit of saying, when people say we just made it up, like, no, we'll show you. If you are interested, you can take this weekend and call all these offices and replicate all of this yourself. The people who are giving you misinformation and disinformation, they are never going to do that.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, you mentioned Marty Barron working for two great institutions. Well, he's worked for a number of great institutions. Obviously, he led the investigation into the underside of the Catholic Church here. And if there's one easily accessible place for, I think, at least in my opinion, for members of the public who have doubts to see exactly what you're talking about, was Spotlight. It seemed to me so beautifully explained to real people
so well
what the work is. Didn't you thought so too?
Spotlight did an amazing job, and also another, because people always talk about the paper chase or talk about kind of older movies and so on. But I have two films that I think are really pretty flawless in the way that they show the editorial process. Spotlight is one. The other is He Said, She Said. Or rather, She Said.
Oh, yes. That was great.
But the great thing about
that was about Harvey Weinstein, the Washington...
Harvey Weinstein and the New York Times breaking that story. And one of the things that they do in there, Andre Braugher, who plays Dean Baquet, he sends that story back like 3 times. It's like, no, you don't got it. No, that's not it. Come back to me when you have. People don't know like how much internal rejection there is before you get something, especially something that ambitious and potentially controversial, into the pages of a major news organization.
Yeah, and that was great. And also the way Weinstein, because he was a rich and powerful guy, could threaten them, threaten the reporters, that they were kind of looking over their shoulder walking down the street. And so was Ronan Farrow that was doing this stuff. Was he with Time or the New Yorker at that point?
Yeah.
Okay, the New Yorker at that point.
I'll tell you, if I can tell you, Lee, quickly, one kind of thing. I was in the building, which is uncommon. The New Yorker is a very kind of atomized place, and people are like off doing their own thing. I was in the building closing a story, and there's all this like buzzing and all this stuff is going on. I'm like, what is happening? What's happening here? And then people are like, look at the website. And I see, and I was like, oh my God. Like, I speed read this piece and then like run out into the hallways and start talking to people. And that was the thing, though. We were in the building of people who were connected to the New Yorker in fairly intimate ways. No idea that this was going on.
Yeah, and was it Time that who wouldn't publish it? Was it somebody before would not publish his stuff? I forget who it was, but the New Yorker did do
it.
Oh yeah, it was.
Yeah, Ronan Farrow.
Yeah, it was NBC.
NBC.
Yeah,
okay, that's right. Thank you.
So Jelani Cobb, I am totally agreeing with Marjorie that the top of the heap of journalism schools in this country is you were lucky enough to run, and they're lucky enough to have you. But you're also at the intersection of, in some ways, of capitulation. I don't mean you personally. You're at Columbia. We've talked ad nauseum both about Columbia, including with 2 university presidents, Mount Holyoke and Wesleyan's presidents, last week, and obviously these major institutions in journalism, not all, but some major ones that have capitulated as well. Can we spend a minute on Columbia? How hard has that been to be in the center of that universe?
So it's been very difficult to be at Columbia for a lot of reasons, because we've been kind of under, a particular kind of spotlight, and we've been, assaulted and assailed, from various directions. Unfortunately, because I'm dean, I'm bound by confidentiality on some things, so I really can't talk about some of this. What I can say is that, Columbia is a university. There's a wide array of opinion about everything that we do there, and that every single kind of step, that we've taken, there's been internal debate about, and there's been back and forth, and that's been the nature, of the situation that we're in, and there's no roadmap, on this.
Do you think the criticism is fair?
I understand why people have the criticism that they have. And so that's probably about the best I can say.
Okay, and by the way, one other thing that I know you're very limited to talk about, if you can talk about it at all, obviously the guy who ran the Columbia Journalism Review was let go, and I know I've read you say it was a personnel matter. Let me ask you something that I think you can answer. Are you able to say about this personnel matter that the issues had nothing to do with the things we've been talking about for the last half hour about whether it's press freedom or Columbia universities?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a personnel matter.
It was a personnel matter.
Sense.
It had absolutely no relation. I can say this. Under no circumstances would I make any personnel decision about anything related to the kind of cross friends or the political attacks, any of those things.
So you look, I only know you from afar and your work. You look like one of the calmest people I've ever seen. If I were in your position, I would be a puddle of goo. I mean, for the Columbia reasons we talk about, and as you say, you're a dean, not to mention you are a figure. If people list on their hand, who do I talk to about the mess in the press? It's you. How do you handle all this?
I think that this has kind of been, it's a marathon, and it's not a sprint. And, I've tried to just kind of maintain an even keel about this. And, and also, I have a family, I have a daughter who's 32, who actually just moved to Boston.
What's she doing?
Yeah. She's a ER nurse.
Where?
She's
good for her.
She's waiting for her licensing to come through in Massachusetts.
But
yeah, my daughter.
That's a calm job.
Yeah, exactly. But ironically enough, she has been, like, her disposition has always been super chill.
Good.
Like, very level.
Yeah.
She doesn't get, like, excited by, like, kind of chaos going on around her. So this is, like, a perfect kind of thing for her. But so I'll be here more, kind of visiting her and her husband. Yeah. So
great.
So I have one last thing about. I think a lot of the problem with distrust of media. You mentioned how the reporters in print could elaborate and how they put their stories together and stuff. That when people say they mistrust the press, they used to trust their local papers, and they're all disappearing. And they might trust newspapers if they read them more. The cable news, not just Fox, where we know that they lie, but even CNN and MSNBC with the shouting and the talking heads, that's hurt, I think, a lot. If my favorite things at CNN is when they actually go out and do some reporting, and it's not just the bickering back and forth. And I wonder if that's how much damage.
And by the way, some of the bickerers and shouting back and forth are straight reporters, for these newspapers.
Yeah. So there's a negative incentive here, and I think that, one, it's a negative incentive that's always been with media. Like, we go all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century with the kind of lurid tabloid press, and all that. There's always been an incentive for going for the most hot button kind of approach to something in news. One of the kind of structural problems with cable news is that, unlike, if we talked about the traditional newspaper where you had reporting and you had opinion and they were clearly labeled as distinct things, that's not clear.
Right.
With CNN or MSNBC or Fox, they think, if you were to talk to producers, they will tell you anything you see after 6 p.m., that's like our opinion page. And anything that you see before that, or if people have a breaking story or whatever, that's news. If you interchange all the parts, from a Fox reporter, a MSNBC reporter, or a CNN reporter, theoretically, you would get the same sort of product. I don't know if that holds up entirely. There's reasons to question that, but just saying theoretically, that's what they would say. And then on the end, you have different editorial slants, because those are like the opinion pages. The Wall Street Journal's opinion page is different from the New York Times, which is different from the Washington Post, which is et cetera. The public doesn't necessarily know that.
Yeah.
Because it's not labeled, it's not distinguished, and it's probably not even possible in that format to do that. So the product has been that MSNBC viewers will tend to have a particular viewpoint, and see the news that's reported through the lens of the editorial slant. Fox people will see the news through the editorial slant of the 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. People, and CNN the same.
Yeah.
And so it's led to a particular kind of confusion. I don't know how you sort that out, given the structure that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Okay.
It's great to have you. By the way, tell your kid to come visit. We broadcast from the library 3 days a week. We'd love to meet her.
I will do.
Tell her to come around.
Her name is Nandi. She's great.
We'd love to meet her.
You never know when you might need a good emergency nurse. You know what I'm saying?
You hope not to meet her.
You hope not, but you never know.
Just in case.
Okay, my nerves are a little shot these days.
Good luck, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Jelani Cobb, who's Dean of Columbia's Journalism School, a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, and editor of the Essential Kerner Commission Report, which we were very grateful to talk to him about some years ago now. After a quick break, we're open the lines and text lines following up on yesterday's conversation about Donald Trump infecting every conversation ever. We're going to check in with you on happiness. Your thoughts on living a happy life. That's next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, Harvard is facing questions after turning information over to the Department of Homeland Security in response to Trump administration demands. A major project to revamp the Mass Pike in Alston could be at risk. And Alabama now has 2 black members of Congress out of its 7 seats in the House of Representatives. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Celebrity Series, presenting bassist Edgar Meyer, violinist Tessa Lark, and cellist Joshua Roman, live at Harvard's Sanders Theater on Friday, May 9th. Tickets at celebrityseries.org. And Native Plant Trust, a source for pollinator-friendly plants, available at Garden in the Woods in Framingham. More at nativeplanttrust.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie and Jim Browdy, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. During yesterday's show, Marjorie and I were admittedly a little, I don't know how to put this, doom and gloom maybe. We regularly talk about how much joy Trump has sapped from our day-to-day lives and our inability to connect with one another, even when we agree politically. So we're turning that around, we think, today. Inspired by a piece, actually a couple of pieces in the New York Times, about small changes that can have an outsized impact on our personal happiness. It can include some of the usual sort of feel-good stuff, like you probably could have guessed, like cherishing every day. I don't even know what that means, but
cherishing every day, Jim.
I don't know what that means, as I said, or savoring life like an astronaut.
Savoring life.
We're not going to do those kind of things, as long as you're not trapped in space, by the way. But there's some new ideas there too. They suggest, for example, setting up an emotional first aid kit, basically making, this is actually good, making mental notes of thoughtful things people have said to remind yourself when you're feeling down. Also hang out with younger people, they say. I guess that's why Bill Belichick is doing what he's doing. The number's 877-301-8970. What our topic is, what's a small everyday change you've made, if you have, in your own life that's made things demonstrably better, happier? It's sort of happiness in you. And by the way, do not fret. For a variety of reasons, Am I the A-hole is only put off one day. We'll get back to it tomorrow at 1:30, and don't ask why. 877-301-8097. Can I share some of the things
Certainly,
it
Jim.
said in the New York Times that I
Yes.
thought made sense?
Yep.
Take a mini vacation of your favorite vacation. Now, obviously, it's not possible if your favorite vacation is Italy. If you love going to the Cape and you're lucky enough to be able to go a week during the summer, go for a weekend, for example. Our great friend Michael Norton, we have to have him back on, who wrote Happy Money. He's from Harvard Business School.
Where's he been?
He wrote a book about
miss him.
rituals recently.
He did.
And he talks about rituals that matter to your family. It could be as simple as a meatloaf that everybody, no, really, that everybody likes.
I like that.
They talk about that in the New York Times, and hanging out with young people, that sort of thing. And there are little things one can do. And as I was Marjorie and I were having this discussion earlier. Yesterday's discussion was sort of, how do you avoid the unhappiness? We'll get to that. How do you avoid the unhappiness of Trump being in your brain 24/7? This is attempted to be not just not being unhappy. This is hopeless. But how do you insert happiness into your life? What's a small thing?
I think
get it out of your system.
We know our audience well. People are complaining.
Go ahead.
Here's two texters. First one, my one source of happiness is getting to tune in to Am I the A-hole every Thursday. I demand an explanation.
Tomorrow
and the second person
at
says,
1:30.
as GBH capitulated to the Trump administration by canceling Am I the A-hole? What's up with that? Why don't you just tell them?
I'm not going to. No, we're not going to. It's an internal thing.
It's an internal thing.
We're going to
okay.
do it tomorrow. It doesn't matter.
We're embarrassed for some reason.
No, we're not embarrassed.
We were.
And
Yes,
stop
we were.
there. Okay, fine.
All
Stop.
right.
Teresa in Lexington, you are first. We want to know what makes you happy. What does not make me happy is Marjorie asking me the same question about why we didn't have Am I the A-hole. So don't put that on your list. Hello,
Okay.
Teresa. How are you? Hi.
Hi, Marjorie and Jim.
Hi.
Love the show. I wanted to just mention that there is a New York Times article today about the big finding of a century of happiness.
Yes.
Yeah, we stole it.
75. No, she's talking about the 75-year study. We were going to get to that, but
That's
you
right.
do it. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to do it. The spoiler is it's connecting with people.
Relationships
and often it's
with
connecting
people.
Strangers.
That's right.
Yeah, but connecting even with strangers on the street, some commonality. Oh, let's get your dog. What kind of dog? But I wanted to also tie that into protesting because I have been to many, many protests now, and I am finding that when I'm out there, I meet people who have never been to protests, and we have a conversation, and by the end of the protest or even in mid-conversation, everyone feels better about it. They feel like, yeah, I'm
That's
glad
great.
I met you, we're connecting. And so protesting isn't only good for our country, it's good for our happiness level. And you don't need to, my brother-in-law said, I'm not really a chanter, so I don't feel too comfortable about it going to a protest. But he went, and he said, I feel so much better going. And this was a hands-off rally.
That is
just wanted to mention that.
That is a fabulous, fabulous call. And you're doing something, and you're
Right.
connecting with people who share your worldview and your concerns. And that's exactly a 75-year study, as Teresa said, talked about good relationships. All the research shows good relationships. Here she goes again. This is I can't have a discussion. Go ahead, Marjorie.
Here's a couple more texts.
I read them. Go ahead.
Even if you don't do the Am I the A-hole segment today, it doesn't matter. Jim is still the A-hole.
Okay, thank
And then
you.
here's
Thank
Joel
you.
from Connecticut. Whenever I get a bit down around the mouth, I just close my eyes and visualize a certain radio host stuck in a Fenway Park seat wearing a dickie and squeezing a liver for his tube into his mouth. Life is good.
Okay. Okay. 877.
Okay.
Who would that be? 877.
That might be someone's name. JB.
301 8970.
A lot of people meditate and do yoga.
Well, you
Kristen,
meditate.
I do.
And do yoga.
I do.
Does that make you happy, or does it just relieve your stress? I don't even know enough.
Both.
It does?
Yeah.
Like you feel good and happy when you're done?
Yeah, when you feel more relaxed, you feel less stressed. I think meditating keeps you less stressed, and so does yoga, less stressed. By the time I'm so exhausted I can hardly stand up.
By the way, Jamie just wrote a very thoughtful piece to us. He says, I love it how even when we try not to be low rent
That's
for a
right.
half hour, our audience brings us right back to where we belong.
We have some low rent elements in our audience, and
We
I'm very
do.
glad because,
That's who we are.
I have some low rent tendencies myself. I
Okay,
must
Anonymous
admit.
says, I think Jim is the a-hole for canceling Am I the a-hole? Okay. Sort of defeated the whole purpose here.
Somebody else says they stopped watching cable news constantly. Really helped my sanity. I think that's a very good point. You have to
But
limit
does that
your
make you
amount.
happy or just get rid of your unhappiness? There's a difference.
Okay.
Do you understand there is a difference?
Well, I think if you do something else, like a lot of people this time of year, you know what they're talking about? Gardening, mulching.
I'll be
I'm
doing
a
that.
lousy gardener.
That
but there's
makes you
something-
happy, mulching?
Yes, because
You're happy when you're done
yes,
mulching?
because it smells really good and it looks really good. You get very disappointed when it gets messed up after about 2 days. But
sure.
to go out and actually do it, it makes me very, very happy. Putting your hands in the dirt, mixing up the dirt makes me very happy.
Eric in Arlington, welcome to the show. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
I think we're
Very well,
Thank you.
So, probably, in keeping with my normal thing here, I believe that when you are playing an instrument, when you are performing a song, you're focused completely on that, and the rest of the world's troubles just go away.
That's a good one.
And so for anyone who can play an instrument, I definitely say that's a great way to just disconnect from the world's problem.
That's a good one.
You know, we've talked a lot about with musicians
Thanks,
like
Eric.
Andres Nelsons, who of course runs the BSO, probably one of the great conductors in the whole world, talks about how music is a balm to lots of people. Doug is talking, oh no, this is Sarah, who's talking about colorful flowers in her house at all times. She's gone back to that in these Trumpian times. Her mental health needs to see beauty to combat all the negativity.
By the way, flowers, I have
are
to
very
say, I know
uplifting.
you wouldn't think this of me.
Do you have a lot of flowers in your house?
No, but when flowers are in the house, we have tulips in the yard.
Yeah.
That's real. When you see them, it does make you
I heard you had a rabbit problem.
We do. Oh, because you're talking to Stephanie, the wonderful yard and landscaping person.
They ate all your rose bushes.
We used. They did. That's really my business. So, Marjorie, so maybe we don't talk about that on the air, okay?
No, I didn't want to reveal any secrets about your rose bushes.
Now,
Jim.
Doug in Vermont is also disappointed. I only listen to Jim and Marjorie once a week. That'd be A-Hole Thursday.
That's
and
right.
Unfortunately, it's not, but it'll be A-Hole Friday.
Jim wouldn't do
tomorrow.
it today.
I would
he wouldn't
not.
do it. I wanted to do it.
Okay, fine.
And he said no.
Okay. We're trying to be classy for like one day in our 26-year career, and obviously we're failing. Let's go to...
Jim, would you kindly declare that you are the a-hole so that I may continue my day knowing that we have determined that there is, in fact, an a-hole? Oh, we have a lot of people complaining. People really like that Am I the A-hole segment, Jim.
How about when Tony V was on last week, you remember?
He said he
and
was
he said
the
he thought
a-hole.
the only reason he was invited on because he was the a-hole. Arlene and Beverly, you are next on Boston Public Radio. Welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon, guys.
And
good
to you.
afternoon. Yeah, first-time caller, long-time listener.
We're very happy about that.
I think you guys are great.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Super, I'm totally where you guys are at. Trump, phases into a lot of iterations in my mind, not good. So I'm not a green thumb by any means, but around my property, I've been planting daffodils and just beautifying my area, keeping it pretty. And going to the gym, I sing and dance at the gym. There's certain classes, Zumba classes that I take that have completely changed my attitude.
Yeah,
And my-
physical exercise and being outside, right? Yeah.
How good are you?
Yes,
Do you have to be... Are you a good dancer or you just love dancing?
I think I'm a good dancer, and I like to sing. So when I'm singing, when I'm dancing, I'm singing too, and I have a group that sing along with me. It's
I love
a riot.
That is fabulous. That was a great first call. Arlene, call us again. That was great. Thank you.
Listen to this.
You don't have to be. I'm not a good singer. I love singing too.
I do
That's
too.
another thing that's really
Singing,
fun.
yeah, singing is really good, and being out in nature is really good.
Why don't you read the text on the screen and make you happy? That'll make you happy.
Oh, here's another texter. First, we lose our beloved theme music because of copyright problems to lawyers.
Oh,
there it is.
Brings back beautiful
Then
memories.
the a-hole segment is disappeared. Happiness slips from reach.
That's
I'm
really
sorry.
sad for an anonymous
I'm
texter.
sorry.
What are you going to read over there?
Well, Melissa from Cambridge, this is an ambitious one,
Yeah.
but she rows on the Charles River. Sinking with others in the cruise shell clears your mind, and there's nothing better than being eye to eye with egrets on the shore.
By the way,
I've
every
always
single
wanted-
person who, I was on the crew team for a day when I was
know,
in
you put your
college.
foot through
I put my foot through
yeah.
the multi-$1,000 shell,
and you were let
and that was the
go.
last day
Yeah.
there. But in any case, when you happen to be on the Charles in the morning and you see I don't mean just the super fit ones because that's a whole different kettle of
Yeah.
fish, but like normal people, particularly those who are by themselves in solitude, the look of bliss
Yeah.
on their face is like. Is palpable the right word there, or
Palpable.
Not?
No, not palpable.
No, it's not palpable. It's
the look of bliss is it's something.
It's real. It's
real.
there,
Okay.
and you can really.
Now, Paul from Marshall says that some people are offended by the term a-hole. He wants to
We're not
change it
talking
to
about that.
Am I the Hegseth?
Oh, that's a good one. No, that's Am I the Drunk, I believe, is the. No,
He's quit
thank
drinking.
you for that,
He's quit
too.
drinking since he took the job. Can you believe Trump fired Walsh instead of Hegseth? The guy he should have fired is Hegseth. Did you see who was sitting next to Trump at the cabinet meeting yesterday? Hegseth.
Yeah. Well, he sits there, and Rubio sits on the right.
Yeah.
By the way, if you missed, we had some of the best guests we've ever had today. But beyond that, if you missed Marjorie's retelling of the slovenly fawning over Donald Trump by his adult secretaries.
You are the most
Yesterday, you gotta listen to it.
incredible human being that's ever been created from the beginning of time. No one can believe your brilliance, your insight, your good looks, your this. I mean, I don't know how these people can keep a straight face. Krista from Haverhill, what do you think, Krista?
Hi, Jim and Marjorie, second-time caller.
Thank you.
And although I live in existential dread on a daily basis, I try and enhance my day-to-day as much as possible. And I garden and I craft. But right now I'm fostering 3 6-week-old kittens that were rescued. So one is very interested in the phone right now. So I've got 3 little girls, and they are taking a snooze right on my lap. So I thought that there was no better time to call in and talk about happiness than right now.
By the way, you call them 3 little girls. You know what that reminds me of? That Cy Montgomery in her book says that she refers to the chicks that are in her house in her backyard as the ladies, which I really totally love too. That was great, Chris.
Yeah.
Krista, thanks.
Little
Enjoy
kittens.
the kittens.
You know, we were talking this morning with the crew. There was a great story in the Globe about this dog that went missing for a month. And there's a picture of him in the Globe. It was probably on TV as well. And the dog was found in a, what did you call it, a sewer hole or something like that?
Oh, do you see the photograph of the dog? It was gone for a month.
It was gone for a month.
By the way, we don't know that it was in the hole for a month.
No, I don't think it was, because it would have been.
But it's staring up and the beautiful photograph of a firefighter.
Don't you love firefighters?
I love firefighters.
I love firefighters.
So here is really a sad thing, because we're trying to be happy today. This is Connie S. from Natick. This is one of the saddest texts we've ever gotten. My husband was called into work 10 to 4. It's normally a day off. He was going to take his lunch break at 1:30 to 2 for MIB a-hole. Thanks, Jim.
That's right.
I really have ruined a lot of people's days.
I think the second text.
This is a faux text, probably written by one of our colleagues. This is Marty Barron. He's the former editor of the Washington Post and the Globe. I'm sitting in the lobby of GBH wondering why there isn't an MIB a-hole segment today. Jelani Cobb and Maria Ressa are with me. I would also appreciate an explanation.
Yeah.
I may have not have been
well,
them.
we had some very distinguished guests, and maybe this wasn't the right day for the a-hole segment.
Maybe it was, but that's not the reason. I mean, there are reasons that I'm not. But by the way, it's going to be back tomorrow. Just wait 24 hours. Connie S., tell your husband to take off 1:32 tomorrow.
People like it on the
and
day
I'll be right.
it's supposed to be.
Well,
there,
I generally
Jim.
do too.
It's on Thursdays. It's supposed to be on Thursdays. And you let everyone down.
I'm sorry. I did.
You let everyone down.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Not talking about this.
We're not talking
today,
about this.
but tomorrow
Okay.
we are. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Al on the road. Hi, Al.
Hello, Al on the road.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Excellent.
I took a little mini vacation last week during school vacation.
Oh.
My son and I went backpacking in Biobrook Wilderness area in Vermont.
Oh,
my
God.
Amazing.
That's
We
pretty
walked
cool.
out. It was a 7-mile hike in. We didn't see anyone else after the first 20 minutes on the trail. And then we didn't see anyone until we finished 2 days later. And just birds, moose, deer, loons, beavers, everything. None of the nonsense. It was amazing.
So that isn't a little terrifying, or
Yeah, I'd be afraid I'd get murdered.
yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. There was no fear of a crime, or no?
We brought bear spray.
Okay.
Al, that is actually a beautiful little story there. Thank you for sharing that with us.
The Celtics are
I think
winning,
I'm going to go in the
somebody
wilderness.
said. Yeah,
I'm
you'll
thinking,
do well in the wilderness, yeah.
I haven't backpacked in weeks, actually. And maybe Al, come back. If Al, next time you go with your son, text me and we'll see if we can, whatever.
I'm 40 years old, just started performing in musicals full of young people singing and dancing. It's hard not to feel happy after that. Oh,
Excuse me. Read
Kelly from
this.
Boston.
No, forget Kelly in Boston for a second.
She's a great text.
Read this sadistic text from Jamie.
Can you imagine Jim lost in the wilderness? Ha ha ha, that's bringing me joy thinking about that.
I mean, what do you think of that?
Oh, I think you should.
It's like an HR violation. What did Kelly or whoever have
She's
to
in a
say?
special care nursery, spending a little extra time holding the babies when their
my
parents
God.
can't be there. That is great. Instantly lowers her blood pressure, she says. Can you imagine? That would be a wonderful thing to do when you retire and volunteer in a special care nursery.
Adam and Maynard, hi.
Oh, somebody else said they go watch
sorry,
babies.
Adam. Hold one second.
They go watch babies once a week. It makes them very happy.
Yeah, I'll be doing
Yeah,
that
so
too.
he's walking their dog on the beach and saying the rosary, good Catholic girl. She feels so good listening to the waves, making my dog happy and feeding my spiritual soul.
Let me just say, as soon as
Camille.
I got back from the wilderness, I'm going to go hold some babies. So that's my next couple of days. Adam
I
and,
don't think they'd let you, Jim.
maybe not. Adam and Maynard, what's up?
Hi. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
I First of all, it always makes me happy to hear you guys bickering. It's very pleasurable.
It sort of makes us happy too, actually,
okay.
Adam, but thank you.
But I started a poetry group. Both my wife and I, since the election, we've both been looking for a tall bridge. But I started this poetry group, and the person, when I called, the person asked, "Is it in person or is it on Zoom?" And I told her we decided no computers, no Zoom, so we only meet in person.
Great.
And we met last night, and yes, the bloviating occupant of the White House did come up because everybody is upset about that. But for the most part, we just sat together and shared poetry, and it was just wonderful. It made me very happy.
By the way, you can hear it.
So,
that is great. That is a fabulous and simple idea. Thank you, Adam, for sharing that. That's great.
Every time I read a poem, I think, why don't I spend more time?
Well, I'm also
reading
not
poetry?
the poem reading type, as you would
I'm
probably
not
say.
either.
But it is amazing how soothing and beautiful and happiness producing
You know, it's a great
is.
poem from your little neck of the wood, Marie Howe, Howe.
Yeah.
This is what the living do. It's a great poem.
What's the gist of it? What's the?
She lost a brother, and she talks about how the little things you walk by and you look at yourself in the window when you walk by. You take hair out of the sink. You wash the dishes. The things that the living people do that you don't do
Well,
anymore.
you know what's a variation on
when
that?
You're dead, Jim.
It's one of my favorite poems of all time, which is also good for this time when you feel hopeless.
Yeah.
Marge Piercy's "To Be of Use."
To be
you
of
know
use.
that poem?
About working all the time.
Yeah, no, we're not working all the time.
that's not
Doing
working
things
all the
that
time.
matter, and it's not about
work,
working.
work.
No, it is not. You ruined the whole feel of the poem forever. That is not what it is. It's not work. That's not. It's to be of use. That is not the point.
To be of use.
Jesus, you've ruined the whole segment, the whole afternoon.
Wait a minute, I'm not the one.
You had.
That ditched Am I the A-hole?
By the way,
Jim.
some of these we can't read.
Yeah, some of them are pretty good.
Oh, this is actually this is a moving one too. Here's an anonymous texter. I got rid of my boyfriend. That made me a lot happier. That's something that people could do. Kathy in Cambridge, you have a minute. Hi, Kathy.
Hi,
Welcome.
Kathy.
Hello, Jim. Hello, Marjorie.
Hello.
Hi.
This is the first time I've ever been on the air, although I listened to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you.
Things. I've lived in Cambridgeport since 1978.
Whoa.
In a household with many people who have lived here, who just need places to stay or whatever. But every year, towards the end of June, a woman named Mary on Magazine Street, her sour cherry tree comes into bloom. And she can't eat cherries because she's diabetic.
Oh.
So she announces it on our neighborhood list, and everybody in the neighborhood comes and picks the cherries.
That is spectacular.
What a great way.
That is spectacular. Hey, Kathy, thanks for the nice thoughts and thanks for calling. That is a beautiful story.
And I repeat, we were going to do Am I the A-hole today, but we didn't because Jim wouldn't do it.
No, it isn't because I wouldn't do it. It was a group decision.
It wasn't a group decision.
Whatever.
I was vetoed.
So what have I never done when I've come in here?
Been happy?
I've never sat down in this chair. So I'm having a little sit-in. We're going to have a little conversation about what happened today. Why aren't we doing the segment?
Yes. Well,
we're not going into it.
Why don't you tell?
No, I'm not. I don't want to get into it.
Why we're not doing this segment?
I've had all these listeners texting me. They said, go in there, ask the two of them, have a little intervention.
We're going to do, Marjorie's going to be tweeting out at 2 o'clock what the reasons were. It's not embarrassing.
And it was Jim, let me tell you.
It's really embarrassing?
Yes.
No, it's not embarrassing. It is not embarrassing.
It's a Cambridge kind of thing. You know
by
what
the
I
way,
mean?
we had a really great show today because of the guests, by the way. You have gone out of your way for 30 minutes to destroy all the good feeling that was created in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, we missed the cherry on the top today.
Okay, fine.
The cherry on the top.
So what do you
Great
do?
Kwame Alexander
Can I
thing
talk to
yesterday. That
Jared
was
for a
great.
minute, please? What do you do to be happy other than listen to Am I the A-hole? What do you
come
do?
in, well, I try to talk to my colleagues and figure out what happened today. Let's talk through this.
Okay,
Let's tell our listeners what happened.
Exactly.
Give a little behind the scenes on the decision
Tomorrow,
making.
1:30 to 2, Am I the A-hole on Boston Public Radio. I apologize.
You better come up with a good one, Jim.
I apologize.
Pressure's on.
What are you doing on that show of yours, Jared Bowman?
We're going to be talking about Kimberly Akimbo, the Tony-winning musical that's coming to Boston. David Lindsay Abair is the Pulitzer Prize prize-winning playwright who actually just texted me. He said, by the time you sit down to do this interview, will you know why Jim and Marjorie didn't do the segment today?
Yeah, people are very upset about it.
They're gonna
This
have to
poor
get over
woman,
it.
she
It's on
says
tomorrow.
she's sitting in traffic and she's very upset. She's off to look for some chocolate. Oh, that's the other one sitting in traffic. She's fuming and late, missing Am I the A-hole? Thanks, Jimbo.
And Anonymous says Jim is the a-hole, is what
That's right.
Okay, what
That's
else?
James to them.
Is there more?
We're going to be talking about May the 4th Be With You, which is the Star Wars concert being presented by New England Film Orchestra.
I love the name.
Although they told me they wouldn't play anything until they find out what happened with the segment today. And then the Native Plant Trust is coming to talk about their 125th anniversary, which is canceled, actually, until people find out why the segment didn't happen today.
This
I'll
is
whisper it to
really.
you. Okay. Let me tell you.
By the way, you know what's appalling about this?
I fought hard.
I make an executive decision
Yep.
in the interest of the show.
Yep.
And Marjorie, who knows it's the right decision, chooses to ridicule
obviously,
me relentlessly.
by the volume of text, you were wrong.
Because you're a leader. That's why you're leading these people down a path of sadism.
You know, they have
Goodbye,
certain
Joe.
ideas about how to live in Cambridge.
You gotta
and
say goodbye
unfortunately,
now.
Jim's lived there for too long.
We have some people to thank,
okay.
too.
Yes, we do. You can keep up with us by 20% aware of our podcast. Oh, by the way, if you want to see the Maria Ressa segment again, you can go onto YouTube or you can listen to our
and
our
Amy
podcast.
Spitalnick and Jelani Cobb.
Yes.
And Maria Ressa and Jessica Tang. It was a fabulous show today.
Okay, we're back at the Boston Public
Sorry.
Library tomorrow. Skylark Vocal Ensemble for Live Music Friday. Boston Business Globe columnist Shirley Young. Birding experts Nate Center and Evan Dalton. Media Matters Senior Fellow Matt Gertz for our Press Play segment. Our crew, Zoe Matthews, Aidan Conley, Nicole Garcia, Hannah Loss, John LeClaw Parker, Jenny Bologna. Special thanks to Brad Lewis for running today's live stream and to Deborah Adams Simmons and Kamala Reed for organizing today's GBH Media Summit, which was fantastic.
And we wouldn't have the guests without them.
That's right. And it's still going on, by the way. We're going to stop over there.
Anonymous texter, Jim, you seem like an a-hole, but nothing compared to those who took your theme music away.
That's right.
Anonymous, Marjorie annoying Jim makes my day, makes me happy. Thanks, Marge.
Okay. This culture show comes on right after us, and I already said thanks to the GBH Media Summit because they did a great job getting us these great guests.
They did.
Okay, I am Marjorie Egan.
Jim Browdy.
He's the a-hole.
Bye.
See you later.
What's trending? What's interesting? What's going on around town? We're talking all things arts and culture on The Culture Show, next on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And the Boston Speakers Series, announcing its upcoming season at Symphony Hall for 7 evenings, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, Ken Burns, outlier author Malcolm Gladwell, and geopolitical economist Pippa Malmgren. BostonSpeakers.org. Nathan Law was the leader of Hong Kong's Umbrella Revolution, elected as a lawmaker and eventually wanted with a bounty on his head. Catch POV, Who's Afraid of Nathan Law? Tonight at 9 on GBH2.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at